Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. This is the start of a new series of videos, live streams, which will be going through mysteries in the world of ice and fire. Probably, in as much as I told you last week, I went out to my patrons, $10 plus patrons. One of the perks over there is that you get the chance to vote on future topics. And when I was just preparing for this live stream, then what was on top of that vote was mysteries in Westeros and Essos. So this is the first of that. There's still a chance if you're a $10 plus patron to get on there and influence that vote or comment below it. I will read all of the comments there as well, take all of that on board. But let's start with this one today. We are looking at the tragedy at Summerhall. Now, this is definitely a mystery. It's something that George R. Martin has deliberately not told us much about, almost certainly because he is holding this back for the end of the Dunk and Egg stories, because, spoiler alert, this is where Dunk and Egg die. The stories, he's told us the Dunk and Egg stories are going to lead all the way through their lives to the point of their death. So the last Dunk and Egg story will be about the tragedy at Summerhall. Which will almost certainly mean that we have a very different feel by the time we get to the end of the Dunk and Egg stories. The start of the Dunk and Egg stories, very light, quite fun, very funny in places. When we get to the end, it's tragedy. So as not to spoil things, George R. R. Martin seems to have deliberately held back on some information about exactly what happened, and we'll get into how he did that in a little bit. But what I thought I would do is give you a bit of the history, the background, the context. I've got, as always, a whole load of questions from my patrons. Then we will take questions from the chat as well as we're going through. But let's look at Summerhall to start with. Summerhall is a lightly fortified palace, Targaryen palace. It's built, it was built in the year 188 AC, so during the years the Targaryens ruled. And it is situated, I haven't got the map up here, but I'm sure you could imagine if you know where King's Landing is, towards the sort of the southeast of Westeros. If you head south from that, you go through the Kingswood, you're into the Stormlands, and then you get the mountain range, the other side of which is Dawn. Just before you're getting into the mountain range, just near what's called the Boneway, which is a pass into the eastern part of Dawn, that is where Summerhall is built. We don't have a huge physical description of it. We don't know much detail at all, really. But it was, as I say, it was built in the year 188, and the context, the political context there was this was built by or on the orders of King Daeron II. It was only 3 years into his reign. He was married to a Dornish woman, and the background to that was Miriam Martell, and the background to that is that his namesake Daeron I had years ago, not too long after the Dance of the Dragons, he had invaded Dawn and briefly subjugated Dawn, but then Dawn rebelled. Lots of people died. It was horrific, and Daeron himself was killed. His heir, Baelor, then decided he wanted to end the bloodshed, so he did this kind of pilgrimage. This is Baelor the Blessed. He did this kind of long pilgrimage through the Boneway that pass into Dawn, and barefoot to Sunspear to negotiate an end to the war. As he got back, many adventures happened along the way, but he got back, and as part of this kind of peace treaty, what he did was he married his cousin, I think it is, if I've got that right in my mental family tree for the Targaryens. Daeron, who would later become Daeron II, would marry a Dornish woman, a princess of Dorne. And so when Diren acceded to the throne, his plan, Dorne became a part of the Seven Kingdoms, and his plan was to try and bring Dorne in and integrate it as much as possible. And one of the ways that he saw of doing this is to set up a third Targaryen home base. They'd already got King's Landing with the Red Keep. They'd got Dragonstone, and then he built a third Summerhall. Now, surely this was, or at least partly, to please his wife, building somewhere for them to be living closer to her home, closer to her family, a nicer climate that she was used to, perhaps as well, out of the rather smelly King's Landing and the even more smelly Dragonstone. And it was, as far as we can tell, it was a pleasure palace. It was a nice place to be. And it was, being a summer palace, the court moved there for quite a significant amount of the year, but it was a lot more low-key and a lot more relaxed. And eventually, though, Diren himself started to get too old and he couldn't do all of the travelling he used to do, and he had to stay in King's Landing more. And this got handed on to his son Maekar. And this could then be his holding. Now, the way that the Targaryens, as you know, they do it, the king is basically based on the Iron Throne in King's Landing. The heir gets to live in Dragonstone. That, pardon me, they become the Prince of Dragonstone, the heir. And this, a third title now, is sort of created unofficially. It would appear as the Prince of Summerhall. And so Maekar became the Prince of Summerhall, and this was his castle. And he had a reasonably large family. He had 4 sons who he brought up in Summerhall before he himself inherited the Iron Throne. What this means is that one of the characters that we know very well, Egg, future Aegon V, he was brought up as a young boy. He was brought up in Summerhall, and we get in the stories when we read in the Hedge Knight and also in the Mystery Knight, then an authority figure within the Targaryen family, first Maekar and then Bloodraven, actually say, well, we should probably send you back to Summerhall. And Egg pushes against this both times. So this was the place that Egg loved the most. Now, he became king, though, so although he could use that, it was no longer his primary residence. He had to be living in King's Landing. However, we're told that he loved it the most. And so after he'd been ruling for quite some time, we come to the tragedy. And the tragedy is very much about Egg. We're told that in the last few years of his reign, he became obsessed with this idea of hatching dragon eggs. He would send off information from far-flung places like Ashai, trying to find things, bits of knowledge perhaps that had been lost in Westeros, with the losing of the dragons, also with Baelor the Blessed, who had destroyed a whole load of what he considered to be heretical literature. He did big book burnings and things, all very horrible for us bibliophiles. But Egg was searching for this information about how to hatch dragon eggs, because the Targaryens still had dragon eggs at this time. It's just they hadn't hatched. And he managed to pull together 7 of these dragon eggs. And he had a celebration in Summerhall. And the cause of the celebration was the birth of his first great-grandchild. This was his son Jaehaerys's son Aerys's firstborn. Aerys here being Aerys II, married to Rhaella, who he would later be Aerys the Mad King. Their child was due to be born. And so Egg seems to have gathered the family at Summerhall for this celebration. And somewhere along the way, maybe this was his plan all along, maybe it was a spur of the moment thing, we don't know all the details, but clearly some plan was made to hatch these dragon eggs. We don't know huge amounts about what happened next. I will tell you all we know in just 1 second, because let's just quickly go to the aftermath, because the aftermath is important, is that the result was that Summerhall burned down. And with it burning down, lots of people died. And as we've already said, Aegon V himself died. His eldest son, Duncan, died. Sir Duncan the Tall, died. Um, there's a whole load of Targaryens that we know were around at that sort of time, but we don't know how they died. It's entirely possible they did too. Very probably Jenny of Oldstones died there as well. Almost certainly a whole load of servants that we don't know the names of died. So this was terrible. And we're told that those who did survive did not want to talk about it, which implies not just that this was a sad and tragic moment, but maybe there was something even more horrifying. Maybe they saw things we don't know. We're left to speculate, because the only bit of information we have about what actually happened there is in a note, a letter sent by Maester Corso, who we're told was the Maester at Summerhall. And if you remember at the beginning, I said that George R. R. Martin has deliberately kept information from us on this. This is probably the most, depending on how you see it, amusing or egregious example of this, because he goes and reverts to wonderful trope even of Maester Corso, who was there, gave an eyewitness account, but tragically, by the time that it reached the citadel, then somebody had spilt ink all over the parchment, and it was ink blotches everywhere. You could only make out a few words. This, thanks, George. Yeah? So you're basically saying you're not going to tell us what happened. So this is what we're told: is that we get bits, fragments of a few sentences that we are supposed to get a bit of an understanding of what happened from. And so these are the exact words we have. The blood of the dragon gathered in one ... 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods. Sorry, 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods, though the king's own septon had warned ... pyromancers ... wildfire ... flames grew out of control, towering, burned so hot that... and then finally died, but for the valor of the Lord Command. So what can we make of that? Well, we will come back to bits of this all the way through this live stream, but the things which seem to make sense within the context of those bits of sentences we have is the blood of the dragon gathered in one seems to imply that most, if not all, of the Targaryens were there. 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods. 7 gods obviously being the faith of the 7, though the king's own septon had warned something. Probably, given the fact that pyromancers, sorcery, Barristan Selmy talks of sorcery happening there, the septon probably didn't approve of what was going on there. So that was probably what the warning was. Then we get told pyromancers were there. Then we get told wildfire. Then flames grew out of control, towering, towering inferno perhaps is what he's talking about here, burned so hot that, I don't know, things melted down. Basically, the fire was very, very fiery. And then we get died. So some people would have died, is the implication, but for the valor of the Lord Command. And the clear implication here, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, but for the valor of Dunk. So Dunk saved some lives here. Now, who, what, we don't know, and we will come back to that a bit later. But that's the sum of the information we have about this. When we sort of go forward, we do get a few references to this, because the key thing that happened here is not just like there was a tragedy and lots of people died, but if you remember, they were all gathered there for the birth of what turned out to be Rhaegar. And this was kind of a shadow over Rhaegar all his life. It seemed to make him melancholy. It seemed to really affect him, and you can kind of understand it. Leaving aside any kind of magical stuff, we will definitely talk about magical stuff, but to have been born in those circumstances, uh, to have been born at a time that probably people sacrificed their life in order for you to be born, and um, your family died on the day that you were born. Every time you have your birthday, your name day, people are remembering the tragedy. Um, it would affect you on a personal level. Added to which, he and Maester Aemon seemed to come to the conclusion that actually all of that was bound up within prophecy. Maester Aemon talks to Sam. He says how he thought that Rhaegar, as a result of this, Rhaegar was the prince that was promised, because the salt and smoke, which is born amidst salt and smoke, is part of the prophecy. And he said, so salt is all the tears for all the people who died, and smoke, obviously the smoke from the fire, which, you can judge for yourself whether you think that is a reasonable interpretation of born amidst smoke and salt. But certainly that's what Aemon and for a time Rhaegar thought. So, but in practical terms, this also brought the Targaryen line down to Targaryen family tree just down to one line. Jaehaerys and Rhaella Jaehaerys at least seems to have survived, but then also his son and his daughter, who were married, survived, and their son survived. Anyone broadly outside of that, we don't hear from again. The implication is that probably they died at Summerhall. The Targaryen family tree, which had got huge and sprawling, had over the course of just a few short decades, 2-3 decades, come into just one line. And that one line, according to the Woods Witch, who prophesied from that one line, the line of Aerys and Rhaella, would come the prince that was promised. Now, she is also tied in with this, because she was at Summerhall. Another implication for the main story, knock-on effect for the main story, is that Woods Witch who gave the prophecy, the prince that was promised prophecy, renewed it for the Targaryen family. She came to court with Jenny of Oldstones, who Prince Duncan Targaryen fell in love with and married, but she was best friends with Jenny of Oldstones, and it would appear that Jenny died, and then the Woods Witch perhaps hung around Summerhall afterwards. She says that she gorged on grief there. We know this because she later turns up as the ghost of High Heart. So, lots of strands going on there. The other strand is Rhaegar himself kept on going back to Summerhall, kept on going back. He would, on his own, he would spend days, nights there. He would sleep on his own in the ruins of the Great Hall, and he would compose songs there on his harp. He would take his harp with him, and he'd come back with sad songs. So all of that is the background to this, and we've got so many questions because this is clearly important. It's clearly central, not just to the stories of Dunk and Egg, but it's almost a kind of a hinge moment that brings us from the stories of Dunk and Egg into the stories of A Song of Ice and Fire. Because although it technically didn't change the line of succession. Jaehaerys was already due to inherit, and then he did inherit just a bit earlier than, a bit earlier than he thought he would. Suddenly, he only survived for 3 years after that, and then Aerys was on the throne, and we're at the time of the Mad King. So that's the hinge here between Duncan Egg's stories and the stories of A Song of Ice and Fire. Okay, let's go to the chat. So, Chatty Lumpkin, thank you so much. Really, very kind, super sticker. I think that is very generous. If there was a question attached to that, oh yeah, just saying, just a thanks to Robert for all his work. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Okay, let's start with some questions from my patrons. Lady Pushkin saying, who were the survivors? Could a faceless man have been present? I'm thinking of them not wanting dragons to be hatched. So, who survived? I'll get onto the faceless man in just one moment. Who survived? Well, we know of Rhaella and Rhaegar were definitely there because Rhaegar was born there to Rhaella. We know that the Woods Witch seems to have been there. What happened to her? Asked Dany to Sir Barristan at one point, and he just sort of like morosely says, Summerhall. So she seems to have been there. By implication, although we don't know because they haven't been specifically mentioned, by implication, Aerys was probably also there, Aerys II, because this was a celebration of the birth of his firstborn. Jaehaerys was presumably there, celebration of the birth of his grandchild. Also his wife, Shera. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that one. We've not had that one on a TV show yet. And also Maester Corso, we know, was there, and by implication survived, because before he died, he wrote this letter that got the ink smudges all over it. So that's who we know survived. As for could a faceless man have been present? Yes. I think the implication has to be that if you're asking if a faceless man's there, has a faceless man been hired to kill anyone? This would be a hugely high price if this is who it is, because this is a king, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, plus pretty much the entire Targaryen family. It doesn't, however, give the impression of the faceless men, because yes, it does. On the face of it, it comes off as a tragedy, an accident. Which, and I should say, we'll get into lots of theories here. The central thesis that is presented to the world is that this was just a tragic accident. That the implication here is that Aegon V became obsessed with hatching dragon eggs. He got some wildfire in, he got some pyromancers in, some sorcery happened. It just got out of hand. The fire was getting too great, and the whole place burned down and lots of people died. And no other theory has yet come out to disprove that. I will, when I get to the end of it, I will give you my overall view. But at a very high level, it's that, yes, there are some really intriguing theories out there. But because George R. R. Martin hasn't given us huge amounts of information yet, probably still the leading theory has to be this is just a tragic accident. But could it have been the Faceless Men? Well, it could have been, but as I say, it doesn't come across easily as their modus operandi, which is quite targeted, very specific. You are paying for the death of a person. And this is incredibly indiscriminate. You're killing lots of people. Now, the faith itself may not care huge amounts about this. All men must die, they would probably say, but if the faceless men were there, that for me simply takes the extra step away from, well, who hired the faceless men, because they are the people really to blame. The faceless men are just a weapon, an incredibly effective weapon. And as far as Westerosi are concerned, there's many more layers to them when you start digging into them. But as far as Westerosi are concerned, the faceless men are just a weapon. You want somebody killed, you could get the faceless men, if you've heard of them. So Tony Sled saying Aerys was influenced by Summerhall to his core. Yeah, so let's if we stop for a moment and try and get into the mind of the Mad King, this will have been a tragedy for him too. His grandfather died at the time of the birth of his first child, his firstborn son. His family are burning to death around him. This will have scarred him. So yeah, it should have done. This should have had a huge impact on him. Now, the fact is, though, that if you read through his life, in his younger years, he actually comes across as a lot more well-adjusted. So when this happened, this was before all of the paranoia started to kick in, before the obsession with fire started to really kick in. He was a Targaryen, don't get me wrong, so he kind of liked fire, but he wasn't obsessed with it. Now, you could argue that this just over time it took him to that point, and that may well be the case. But you can also equally argue that, as is argued in The World of Ice and Fire, that it's the Defiance of Duskendale, where he gets kept a prisoner for 6 months. That's the moment that he really, the switch flips in his brain. So, yes, I wouldn't disagree that this will have impacted on him. But I think we don't know, thankfully, we don't know all the details about his mind and how his mind worked. There are almost certainly other things going on there. Michelle Raimo, being a member here, asking a question, a member's question. Just for those, as this reminds me, if you wish to support this channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon, and there's a link down in the description. And I try and make sure that's the best place for sort of rewards back as well, including the chance to influence what we do in future live streams, which is why we've got this topic today. But if for whatever reason you don't want to go to Patreon, then you can also support me here by being a channel member on YouTube. And if you do, then your name will appear slightly brighter in the chat, and it means that you get free, effectively free super chats, so I get to see them a lot more easily. But it gives me the opportunity to say thank you, patrons. I'll do this now. Thank you, patrons, and also thank you, channel members. I hugely appreciate your support. Michelle says, a little bit of tinfoil. Do you think it's possible the dragon eggs survived Summerhall and are buried under all the debris? I mean, I don't think this is tinfoil. Is the likelihood is they did survive. Dragon eggs are I wouldn't say impervious to fire, but they seem to be able to take a great deal of heat. Now, we do know that some dragon eggs were still in the possession of House Targaryen afterwards, because Aerys II, we're told at one point, tried to hatch dragon eggs. Where were they from? Perhaps Egg had more than those 7. Maybe they were just like hanging out of Dragonstone or something. Who knows? But the idea that some of them survived is, yeah, I think that's reasonable. Attempts will have been made to get them. because they are hugely valuable. But perhaps one could still be buried under there. I mean, the counter argument, which we will come to a little bit later, is that we don't know all the details about dragon eggs, and me sort of blithely saying that they're impervious to a lot of fire is largely based on what we know with Dany as much as anything else, that she puts them into a brazier and that doesn't seem to affect them in the slightest. This is before she manages to hatch them. But those eggs, they were different. She could already feel dragons stirring within them. And when the eggs did break open, then it seemed to be with some force. So, bit effectively, it's not written like this, but bits of dragon eggshell went flying. So, it's possible that at that extreme heat, if they really were old and dead dragon eggs, then maybe they did sort of explode in some way. Commander Ray, thank you, Robert, for the great streams and videos. Thank you. In the books, Arya Stark walks into a bar. The barkeeper asks why the long face. Thank you very much. Appreciate that one. Let's go to Sir Tony Sled asking, at Summerhall, did Egg lose his mind and Aerys saw? I mean, I don't think we've got any evidence on this. We don't know. The only thing I think we can say is that it seems pretty clear that he was very focused on hatching those dragon eggs. And at some point, he will realize either it wasn't working or the fire had got out of control, at which point he will certainly have lost it in some way, I am sure. But Aerys will presumably have been just as, if not more, focused on the fact that his wife was going into labor. Wolfie's World Studios, a new member. Thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. And welcome. Let's go to a question from Phelan Walker. From a broader perspective, which groups or persons benefited from the Summerhall incident and who were disadvantaged? Well, this is an interesting question. It's I wanted to take this one relatively early in the live stream so that we get to see what the implications of this are, and also who the potential guilty parties are. If it is foul play in some way, if it isn't an accident, who might have done it? So, and I said already, it didn't affect the succession because it didn't. Jaehaerys was always going to inherit. It just happened earlier than he thought. Similarly, Aerys. He was always next in line to inherit after Jaehaerys. So he probably became king a little earlier than he thought, but still he wasn't next in. Yeah, he was then next in line after his father, so it wasn't that he immediately inherited. So, yes, you could argue that both of those did. That I don't think anyone thinks that Jaehaerys did it. Some wonder whether Aerys might have done. We'll come back to him a little bit later. Who else? The people who might have gained something from this could potentially be the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. Egg's rule was quite controversial. He, due to his time wandering around among the fields and the hedges of the Seven Kingdoms, he started to get these crazy notions that maybe we should be providing rights for the small folk. Maybe we should be looking after them a little bit more. Maybe we should be taking away a few rights that their overlords have got. He managed to push through some reforms, but he was not 100% successful. he tried to shore up his political position by getting his children to be making politically advantageous marriages. That didn't work. Um, Duncan broke off his engagement to be marrying Jenny of Oldstones. Um, Charis married his sister, and then the final Diran turns out, it would appear, that he was gay, and he was due to, bizarrely, he was due to be married to the woman who became Elena Tyrell. And so she was Elena Redwine at the time. She, depending on who you listen to, either he backed out of it or she backed out of it, but either way, that wasn't a match that was going to be a happy one, let's put it that way. So Egg was then without this political backing that he wanted, and that may have played into his desire to bring back dragons. And the nobles who were pushing back against Egg's reforms may well have seen this as a good thing if he died. Certainly after he died, a lot of those reforms were repealed. There are possible overseas rivals. Immediately after this, the realm had to go and defend itself against the Ninepenny Kings, which was effectively the fifth Blackfire Rebellion. That was squashed quite quickly, but you could certainly say that this would put the Seven Kingdoms on the back foot when if an invasion was being planned. So they could potentially gain some advantage from it. But also, anyone who thought that dragons would actually be brought back by this and didn't want that, which is where the Maesters come in, because the Maesters clearly don't like dragons. So those are the potential suspects here, you would have to say. Are certainly the people who benefited in some way from the deaths that happened there. Similarly, any political, when coming back to the nobles, any kind of political rivals for the Targaryens. Targaryens with dragons would be unassailable at the sort of the top of the pile. Without dragons, with a really small family, they became vulnerable, and they were vulnerable in just a few short years, 40 years. Then, well, actually it's not, it's 25 years after this, we get Robert's Rebellion. So it's potential other claimants to the throne also would benefit. Who is disadvantaged? Other Targaryens, because the power of the Targaryens came down. The pyromancers, I suspect that their name was not particularly welcome in a lot of places after that. They clearly couldn't control the flames. And the Woods Witch also, she gorged on grief. She was not happy. Shantanu David, been a member for 5 months. Thank you so much. Saying, thank you for all the content, Robert. Starting a small channel of my own on a lesser appreciated fantasy. Taking your advice, just start writing. First of all, thank you very much. Starting on lesser appreciated fantasy sounds fantastic. When that's up and running, let me know and I will give a shout out. But yeah, that's an advice that I've given many a time. If you are there considering setting up a YouTube channel, podcast, whatever it is, the biggest obstacle to you doing it is just launch it. Just write something, create something, push it out there. It is going to be rubbish. Own that, accept that. Do not worry about that. People are not going to be judging you on the first thing you do. You build from that. You see how you could have improved it, and then you keep on going, and you keep on going, and you keep on going. I have just by the by, if you ever want to hunt for it, I've taken down quite a few of the old videos that I did ages ago, but I deliberately kept up the very first video I ever created on, not on this channel, on the main channel, in Deep Geek, which was, I think I called it something like The Real Tyrion Lannister, and it's like 5.5 minutes of me talking in a very painfully slow way with just still picture and then a long pause and then another still picture, I was taking myself incredibly seriously, but it was not good quality. The microphone was horrendous, and I've kept that up there not just for nostalgia reasons, but I hope as a little bit of encouragement to somebody who's starting up something. They can go and look, okay, so I think that what I produce now is a world's difference from what I produced when I started out. Do not worry about that first thing. Just go out there and do it. And I'm very happy to support people. Anyway, that was an entire digression. David, I wish you all the very best of luck, and do let me know when you launch that. So Tony Sled saying Egg married into the Blackwood dynasty of Strange. Yeah, he did. Yeah, Egg was married to a Blackwood, Betha Blackwood. We do not know, however. She's another one of these people, and we're not given a full cast list. This is one of the key points here about this. We do not know everyone who was there. The implication is that the whole family was there. The implication has to be, therefore, that she died too. We do not know. So at some point, perhaps we'll be told, but yeah. Wolfie's World Studios saying most people think Bran will be able to affect the past, citing his tree talk with Ned and Theon, but never bring up how he unlocked Jon's warg abilities in Jon's wolf dream in A Clash of Kings as proof. Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting point. So, first of all, can Bran affect the past? I think the answer is yes. He gets, and I think it's quite clearly that yes, Bloodraven basically tells him you can't affect the past, but we have seen Bran do that at least a couple of times. When he goes through the Weirwood tree, he calls out to his father, who he sees. The spot that Ned normally had, just sat in front of the Weirwood tree, cleaning his blade. And then he called out, and Ned kind of turned around and said, "Who's there?" Another time he calls out to Theon, and Theon hears his name. These are not huge shifts at the moment. They're just like little moments where he can interact with the past, but he definitely can. In terms of unlocking Jon's warg abilities, I don't think Jon's warg abilities needed to be unlocked, is my general take on this. I think all of George R. Martin has been quite clear. All of the Starks have the ability to warg, and the difference between them is how much they're willing to embrace it, because none of them really, Bran now a tiny bit, but none of them really have been trained in skin changing, so they don't really know that it's a thing, and then they start doing it almost accidentally, maybe in their sleep, but Jon has been brought up that this is a great shame, being able to skin change, and so he goes through, and we see Varamir, who just like says he is powerful. We see Varamir's POV. Jon is a powerful skin changer, but he doesn't want to be. He's hiding from it. So I think my take is unlocking Jon's skin changing abilities. I think they're all there already. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. Saying just a show of love and support for all the great content and stories. You and Dan the dog are loved and appreciated. Well, thank you. I hugely appreciate you and your support as well. Then we get Maura Lee also saying for the mods, thank you very much indeed. I just see here Wolfie's World Studios has sort of followed up that, talking about unlocking his abilities, saying, I just reread John's chapter in the Skirling Pass, and in his dream he sees Bran as a Weirwood and talks to him. And John says he doesn't understand how Bran can do it. To which point Bran says, it's not so hard once you open your eye, and touches John on the forehead with his branch finger, and John immediately goes into seeing through Ghost's eyes as he's attacked by Oral, warning the eagle. Yeah, I mean, the echoes, they're strong. But as I say, I think he's got this power already. But thank you. I will. That's a useful challenge, and I'm going to go back and have a look at that again. And if I have any more thoughts on that one, I will try and remember to mention them next time. Thank you for that. Good insight. Let's go to Andrew Biederman saying, hello, Robert. We often talk about the Maesters conspiring against dragons and magic, but are there others who might have sabotaged this plan to bring back dragons? It would seem that the Lords Paramount or other ambitious noble houses would have an interest in having the Targaryen family power be based in the normal system of loyalty and intermarriage, as opposed to their having unassailable monopoly on dragons. Without dragons, everyone else has relative leverage and power. Any thoughts? Well, yes, absolutely. I think the one thing we do have to sort of grapple with here as well is we often go into this with, I mean, who's there trying to stop egg from hatching dragon eggs? I suspect most people, the vast majority of people, certainly non-Targaryens, will have thought this is just craziness. Dragon eggs, we haven't hatched dragon eggs for, what is it, 100 years now? And everyone's tried. They've all tried. We get all of these different kings. Aegon the Third tried to do it. Baelor the Blessed tried to do it. We get other kings who tried to hatch dragon eggs. Nobody seemed to be able to do it. You had great sorcerous people like Shira Seastar, like Bloodraven. They didn't manage to hatch dragon eggs. Even in the Mystery Knight, we find Daemon II Blackfire, the Blackfire Pretender, who dreamed of hatching a dragon. The dragon dreams and dreams of hatching dragon eggs had happened for decades at this point, and it hadn't happened. And during this time, the Maesters will have been presenting their case to generation after generation of nobles, saying, yes, magic was once here, but it's gone. The dragons were once here, but they've gone. They're not coming back. And by the time we get still further, 40 more years into the future, by the time of the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, I've noted this several times, but I think it's really important. In book one, the characters we're supposed to see as wise, learned, clever, they all either don't think about magic or openly mock the idea that there's magic and magical creatures. Tyrion, classic example, goes to the wall. He's mocking the Night's Watch for the idea that there might be anything inhuman north of the wall. Maester Luwin, very strong, teaching the children of the forest are all dead, dragons are dead, magic does not exist. The characters that otherwise we're being told are clever and knowledgeable have bought into this idea that magic has gone. And so that's the standard thought out in the Seven Kingdoms. I do not personally, therefore, I do not think that the nobles will have gone into this thinking, uh-oh, Aegon, he's going to hatch some dragons. There's going to be dragons everywhere. I just think they thought he was going crazy. So that doesn't mean that they wouldn't want to kill him, but it does, I think, mean that the motivation wasn't to stop the dragons. That's not necessarily the case for the Maesters, of course. And you say, we often talk about the Maesters, but might there have been others? Yes, but of the people who are there conspiring, I think outside of the inner circle, Targaryen-y type people, who we'll touch on in a moment, then the Maesters are the only ones there who might think, hang on, he's just got himself this book from a shy. That tells him the steps that you need to take in order to be hatching dragon eggs. He might actually do it. We know, because we've been keeping an eye. We know the other priests, the other kings who tried to do this, they just missed out a few elements. Baelor the Blessed, he prayed over the eggs with the faith of the Seven. That was never going to work. Aegon the Third, I don't know, he didn't do blood sacrifices. That didn't work. Whatever it is, if they thought that he knew how to hatch them, then maybe they would do something. The counter to that, I can't remember if I forgot a specific Maesters question later, but I'll go down this route with the Maesters. The counterpoint to that is that my take is that the reason why the dragon eggs didn't hatch in the first place is because the Maesters poisoned them. In that gap, I did a video on this a while back. In that period during the Regency, when the Maesters ruled everything, and when I say ruled everything, I mean that the Grand Maester was regent, so had the power and authority of the king. He was also the hand of the king. He was also the only member left of the small council, and he was in charge of the communications network through the Maesters. And pretty much all of the other lords of the land, the lords paramount, were either children or facing their own facing wars or a long hard winter in the north. No one was paying any attention. That during that period was the moment when the Maesters could do this. So if we buy into that theory that they poisoned the dragon eggs, they would not have been concerned that the egg was about to be hatching dragon eggs, because they will have known that they killed those dragon eggs. Oh yes, one other point I wanted to make on this one, which wasn't about Maesters, that if we're talking about people who want to get rid of Aegon V, if there's somebody out there who decided to do this and burn down, kill Aegon V because he was getting too close to getting dragons and becoming too obsessed with the old Targaryen ways, Jaehaerys II was also, we don't know huge amounts about him. We don't read huge amounts about him. He was even written in when Game of Thrones came out, the TV show, he was even written out of the histories. This was complete digression, but this was George R. R. Martin. So when House of the Dragon came out, he only had 3 stipulations at the time. I'm sure he probably would have a few more now, but at the time he had 3 stipulations. He wanted the colors of the dragons to be a lot more pronounced. He wanted the heraldry to be a lot clearer and a lot more pronounced, and he wanted Jaehaerys II to be put back into the official records of the line of kings, because for I would say inexplicable. There are explicable reasons why they did, but it seems unnecessary in hindsight that the showrunners took Jaehaerys II just out of Targaryen history. But Jaehaerys II was, if anything, even more focused in on the prince that was promised prophecy. He might not have been the dragony focused Targaryen, but he was a prince that was promised focused Targaryen, to the extent that he forced his 2 children to marry each other because some woods witch had come and prophesied that from their line would come the prince that was promised. His children didn't want to marry each other. He made them marry each other. And then he named his eldest son after Aerys I, who was bookishly obsessed with the magical knowledge, and probably was somebody who rediscovered the prince that was promised prophecy. Okay, let's have a look in the chat. I think that might actually be me caught up in the chat. Yep, I think I am caught up. Let's go to a question Jack saying, "Hello, Robert. A lot of people spend time speculating on what caused the fire. An obvious answer they usually give is wildfire, but there's no record or indication that the flame was green in any way. Surely this points to the cause being something else, maybe an accident and nothing to do with a ritual, or dragon flames themselves brought back to life. A baby dragon wouldn't have survived a crumbling castle." Thoughts? Yes. So my feeling is that wildfire was there, and this isn't because of a description of the flames. We're not told about the colours of the flames, but in the Maester's account, the one with the ink blotches on, one of the words that survives is wildfire, and then flames out of control, towering inferno, by implication. All of this sounds like wildfire. So pyromancers are there. This does seem to imply. I mean, pyromancer is the other name for the alchemists guild, the guys that Tyrion goes to talk to in a Clash of Kings, and they're the people who hold all the wildfire. So, yeah, wildfire does. It seems to have been there. Now, just because that was there, I mean, I personally, I think this is not the most important point in terms of it's a fire that got out of hand. Now, that could have happened just with a normal fire, but I think the point is that if, and we know he was, if Aegon was doing his research, he will have discovered that you need heat. Probably. That certainly seems to have been what Dany concluded when she was hatching her eggs. And by the way, I've got a video. If you've ever wondered what was it that she did that made those dragon eggs hatch that all these other Targaryens did, including this time here, and they didn't hatch, why did that work? I've got a video coming out at some point in the next week or so on that. But she concluded, she tried early on she put an egg into a brazier, burning flames all around it. It didn't hatch. And then she thought, I need more heat. And that's when she put them into the funeral pyre. So Aegon, yes, Aegon would have probably come to the same conclusion that he needed a lot of fire. And he probably went to the pyromancers and said, how do I get a lot of fire? And they said, well, we've got this green substance here. This could work. He says, right, let's do that. And then they set the fire. And if the fire then just got out of control, as I say, it's not the most important because that can happen with a normal fire. The fact it's with wildfire just makes it even harder to control. For my peoples, apologies for going off topic, but do you believe Rickon to be a potential green seer or just a powerful skin changer with some green dreaming ability? Yeah, I'm trying to stick to Summerhall, but briefly, he's still very young. We forget this. At the start of the story, he's 3, I think. He really is. He's treated like a baby because he is very, very small. So what he has very clearly is a very strong skin changing walking bond with Shaggy Dog, and also when Bran gets the dream about his father in the Winterfell crypts, Rickon gets it too, and that seems to imply that he's got more, not just skin changing abilities, that he's also got some kind of green dreams or something along those lines. So yes, I think is the short answer. The implications are there. There's also other layers to this that I won't go into right now, but hints that he's actually probably quite strong, but we just do not know yet. We've not had a POV from his perspective, and he is very young, so he's not been trained, so he probably doesn't even know what he's doing. Matthew Stewart. We know Brienne and Hodor allude to Dunk. What other characters or events do you see as callbacks to Dunk and Egg's adventures? will Summerhall hold significance in the end of A Song of Ice and Fire? Yeah, so what other characters or events do you see as callbacks to Duncan Egg's adventures? I mean, George R. R. Martin has dropped a few of these very clearly. He did with Vagon, young Griff, very clearly when Tyrion sees him for the first time, he's wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, which is very much the kind of the egg image that we get from the Duncan Egg stories. That's the kind of hat that he wears, and the two of them share a similarity in that they are wandering the land and learning how to be a good king by understanding the small folk, as opposed to having lessons kept well away from all of that in a palace somewhere. So there's that. There's various Varys. A lot of people pick up on the Varys things. He's got a bald head. He's told that he's bald as an egg, and only Targaryens know the secrets of the Red Keep. And here comes Varys, bald as an egg. So that there are lots of kind of hints like that going to and fro. In terms of Summerhall specifically, when I'm writing this, Danny, I think I've got a question from one of my patrons coming up later on, very similar to this. So I'll kind of wrap that one up into here. But the echoes of what happened at Summerhall with what happens with Danny are strong. Very strong flames. 3 deaths. There are many more deaths at Summerhall, but we're only specifically told of 3: Dunk, Egg, and Sir Duncan the Small. And from that, we're told Rhaegar is born. So a dragon, thematically, is born. This is George R. R. Martin again doing a kind of a throwback to the Duncan Egg things. This is what we get with the end of the Mystery Night, when we get the Blackfire Pretender has a dream of a dragon egg being hatched there at the tourney, and Bloodraven says, well, a dragon was born here, Egg, who sort of came into his own, as it were. And so that is kind of thematically echoed by Rhaegar's birth. But then, as I say, we're moving back to the comparisons between Rhaegar and Summerhall and Dany. We get the 3 deaths, the fire. We get the prince that was promised / Azor Ahai echoes. Rhaegar believed later, Aemon believed that he was as Azor Ahai reborn, prince that was promised, because of that. And then people started to believe that Dany is Azor Ahai reborn because of what happens here. And we even go as far as having someone providing the knowledge of how to do this who comes from a Shai. We're specifically told that Egg sent for information, sent as far as a Shai for anyone who could help give him information about how to hatch dragon eggs. And Dany, right at the very end, when she's building the pyre and she puts Miri Mazdur, who was trained in a Shai, into the pyre, she thanks her for teaching her about how to do this kind of magic. Inadvertently, only death may pay for life. So the knowledge of how to do it had come from a Shai in both instances. So there are lots of echoes and bouncing forward and back through that. And that's not coincidental level. That's the kind of thing that George R. R. Martin definitely was thinking about. And in terms of the significance at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, I've definitely got a question coming up on that a bit later, so I'll pick up on that bit then, if that is okay. And question from Adam Geets saying, "Hi, Robert and Dan, who we haven't seen in too long." No, I miss him here as well. He used to sort of lie on the other side a long time ago, the other side of this green screen thing I've got going on. But now he goes upstairs and gets to be. He's an old dog these days. He needs his beauty sleep. Do you think the mystery of what happened at Summerhall has an impact on the resolution of the overall story? Here we go. I knew I had a question on this. So I've talked my way through half of this already, but sort of thematically, yes, there's a huge amount. This also has a practical impact. It has a practical impact with Rhaegar, who I'm sure at least part of his fascination and interest, probably a lot of his fascination and interest in prophecy stems from this, and being told, Maester Aemon telling him, "I think that you are the prince that was promised," because of what happened there. He then becomes obsessed with prophecy. This obsession with prophecy leads to him trying to fulfill prophecy or to drive prophecy forward, which leads to the whole Lyanna thing, which leads to Robert's rebellion, and that pushes its way right up to create the story that we have. It also seems to have led to the Song of Ice and Fire potentially being rediscovered. I think we will find that he learned more there than is let on. I think we will discover more. I don't know who's from, but someone somewhere is going to tell us. Maybe John Connington. Maybe if Richard Lonmouth is really Lemon Cloak, he might do it. Somebody who was the confidant, maybe someone in House Dane might know. Someone who is the confidant of Rhaegar may well be able to say what it was that he learned and gained from his time there. And then finally, we have the Woods Witch, who is central to it, not finally actually, who is central to all of this and has played a role and is met again, and I suspect we will see again at some point, being there at High Heart. But I think the other thing in terms of how this plays into the overall end game narrative is that this is what brought the Targaryen family tree down to basically just the trunk. It's not really a tree anymore, it's just a trunk, one line. And whoever caused it, however it happened, that was the result. And that weakened the Targaryen family enough to make them able to be toppled over in Robert's rebellion. But also meant that we have some people who now either believe themselves to be, or more likely to start with, others believe them to be Azor Ahai Reborn or the Prince that was promised, because who else could it be? If you have to be of the line of Aerys and Rhaella, who is there realistically? Dany will think that she's the only one who is left. Then we'll get Aegon the Sixth, Vagon, Young Griff, whatever you want to call him. He will go, well, hang on a moment, I am. And my father Rhaegar thought I was. And then you'll get Jon, who suddenly appears. Well, he doesn't suddenly appear, he's been there all along, but at some point it will come to light what his parentage is. And so then he is another person. And so you'll get a limited number of candidates who everybody is looking for. Commander Ray. Just spotting in the chat people talking about Dany's 3 eggs. Yes, so my working assumption is that her 3 eggs are not any of those eggs that were at Summerhall. The ones that are at Summerhall are the ones the Targaryen family kept in Westeros all that time, after the dragons had stopped hatching of their own accord. Because let's not forget, dragons used to hatch normally. The Targaryens didn't have to go through a huge magical ritual in order to get a dragon egg to hatch. That they would just hatch. Another dragon has just been born. But so the three that Dany has, if you take Illyrio at his words, they came from the Far East, the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, but probably he bought them from the Sea Lord of Braavos, who got them in turn from. And I always have one mind blank per live stream. The sailor woman who left, Alyssa Farman. Here we go. Alyssa Farman, who stole them and sold them so that she could buy a ship that she could circumnavigate the globe with. And those ones stayed in Dawn, and they kept hold of them. And it makes entire sense that after 100 and something years, or in fact at this point that's over 200 years, they've not hatched. The Ralvosi now probably think no dragons have been hatched for a long time. These are not going to hatch. They're stone cold. They're not potential future dragons that we've got here. These are just very pretty and rare things. And if somebody tried to buy them off of them, then they might then sell them. So that seems to be the most likely lot. And that's important because if we buy into the Maester Conspiracy that the Maesters poisoned the dragon eggs just after the Dance of the Dragons, that means that any of the dragon eggs that were on Westeros Dragonstone, those are all fair game and probably were poisoned. But the only 3 eggs that we know of which survived were because they were over in Braavos. Those 3 eggs were not poisoned, and so those are the 3 eggs that Dany gets. Right, let's go to a question from where did we get to? Commander Ray, I think. When thinking of Summerhall, I think of 2 major things. One, that the Dragonborn and that egg, one that the dragon that was born and that egg was dreaming of was Rhaegar. This is the one that Egg was dreaming of, was Rhaegar, for he had an important role to play. I also think about Eris, who, while not off the rocker as he became post Defiance of Duskendale, his love of fire and the fact he survived just makes me think he's somehow involved in these things going wrong, whether intentional or not. Okay, so I've already talked a little bit about the sort of the echoes there of the we're trying to hatch dragons and Rhaegar was born. I mean, we should probably underline it because for all of the other conspiracy theories we can have going on around what happened here, clearly thematically this is what happened. Thematically, Aegon V tried to hatch a dragon and Rhaegar was born. And that is the thematic thing that was going there, leaving everything else aside. As for Eris, we've already said that he, I guess, sort of gained from this. He was already in the line of succession. He would have become king at some point anyway. This probably speeded up the process a little bit, but there's no immediate reason to suspect him. But one other thing we do probably have to point out is that we don't know who was Prince of Summerhall at this time. And if you sort of go through the candidates, there's every chance that it might actually have been Aerys. He's not the heir to the throne. That's Jaehaerys' father. He's the one afterwards. He's the person who'll inherit after that. So he probably was Prince of Summerhall at the time, which means that he will have known Summerhall and would have been able to prepare Summerhall, because if Aegon's there, if Egg's there saying, "Hey, everyone, come to Summerhall," it makes perfect sense that you don't want this heavily pregnant woman to be leaving her home to be heading off, tromping around the country to someone else's home. You want to say, "We'll come to you. We'll do the party where you are," and so this all kind of makes sense that this was home territory for Eris. So if he did want to do something, then he would have a chance to get away with it. He would have a chance to prepare. That doesn't mean that he did do it. It just means that he has the opportunity. Means, motive, and opportunity. He had the opportunity, sort of a motive. Did he have the means? I mean, I think if there's enough wildfire out there, then yes, potentially. Okay, let's go with Ninja Robbo. What do we know about Egg's mental health at the time? Do his actions seem reasonable-ish and in keeping with his mostly sensible character that we seem to get in most portrayals of him? Or is there any indication that Egg might have started to crack? Pun very much intended. Well, we don't have huge amounts. This is the kind of like the disparity we have between knowledge of the first half of the Targaryen rule of the Seven Kingdoms and knowledge we have of the second half of Targaryen rule of the Seven Kingdoms, because we've got Fire and Blood for everything up to the Regency. After that, all we have for some, if you got the World of Ice and Fire, that's the main source of knowledge we have, and all we have is like 2 or 3 pages covering, for one king, covering their entire reign. And so here with Egg, we do get a little bit of information about him, but all we're told is that he was consumed by a search for ancient lore that would help him bring the dragons back. Now, to be consumed by something does seem to imply a very great focus on it at the expense of other things, which perhaps could be some indication that he's going all dragonish. The other hint we have, Maester Aemon, his brother, said to Sam at the end of his life, he said, "My brothers dreamed of dragons, and the dreams killed them." So what Maester Aemon clearly seems to think is that the cause of Egg's death was not a great Maester Conspiracy. It was not his grandson trying to speed his way to the throne. It was his desire. The cause of it ultimately was his desire to be bringing back the dragons. He had dragon dreams, and the dragons and the dreams killed him. So it was his dream, his desire, what he wanted that killed him. Now, both of those seem to hint that perhaps we're going to see a shift in Egg, as we might expect. Egg, at this moment in time, we've only had 3 stories. We feel like we know Egg really well. We've only had 3 stories, and all of them when he's a child. And he's a child at this point, I wouldn't say without a care in the world, but he is the 4th son of a 4th son. The reason why he was allowed to be wandering around the Seven Kingdoms with a random hedge knight that nobody had ever heard of before was because he was, expendable. He could be allowed to do it because there were so many other Targaryens out there before him in the line of succession. He was not expected to become king. His moniker when king was Aegon the Unlikely. That was how much people were surprised that he became king. How did he become king? When he was born, he was 4th son of a 4th son, not expected to at all, which means that his his personality was shaped by this. His personality was not thinking he was going to rule. Yes, he always had, even Egg is lovable, but he had a bit of the Targaryen arrogance, the noble arrogance, all the way through the Duncan Egg stories. And we will surely see a shift when he becomes king, when he has to start making serious decisions, when he has to send people effectively off to war. Those are the kinds of things that can change a person, and he's going to get older. He's not going to be a child. I mean, he will be for the next, I mean, who knows, 2, 3 Duncan Egg stories, he will still be a child, but then after that, he's going to start growing up, really. So, yeah, we would expect to see a change in him. And a lot of Targaryens, the older they get, the more focused in on dragons they get. That's certainly what happened to Aerys II. Maester Aemon always seemed to have a healthy interest, but the older he get, the more dragon dreams he'd seem to be getting. And certainly Viserys seems never to have been a particularly nice young man, but as he grew older, then he grew even nastier. The Targaryens often, as they got older, seemed to sort of spiral in a bad way. Right. A question from Justin Areno saying nice things in the chat. Thank you very much. It's great to see you there. Stephen, given the axioms that great magic requires great sacrifices and that only death can pay for life, did the unleashing of powerful magic and the deaths at Summerhall have an effect on the birth of Rhaegar? Did it make him exceptional? Well, we've already noted that a dragon was hatched thematically there. For George R. R. Martin, I say this so many times, I sometimes bore myself, but it's true that the way George R. R. Martin has written this story is that, as far as the plot is concerned, it is far more important what people believe than the truth of what actually happened. So whether magic happened there that made Rhaegar special is less important than the fact Rhaegar came to believe that he was special because of what happened. So it can sometimes feel like you're playing with words a bit there, but there is a clear distinction. Rhaegar's belief was the thing which drove him. Rhaegar's belief that he, first of all, he was the prince that was promised. Then his son was the prince that was promised. He had to go off and make the third dragon, third head of the dragon, that kind of thing. Those were the things which drove the action and literally create or caused or played a large part in helping cause a civil war. So, did that make it? I think the way George R. R. Martin often works is that these kind of things work in a circle. If there's a prophecy that plays out, then it becomes self-fulfilling because the person believes it and goes off and does these things. Did something magic happen? Now, Barristan Selmy talks of sorcerers. Whether they were actually sorcerers or whether these are just pyromancers, it's hard to say. Barristan Selmy he's a very pious man in his way, but also quite sheltered and judgmental as well. When he says there are sorcerers, that doesn't necessarily mean what we would the image we have conjured in my mind when we say think of sorcerers. But did any magic occur? I think is the key thing here. And we don't know. I hate to be boring on this one. We don't know. Some of the key attributes that are there to perform this kind of Valyrian magic, there's clearly some intentionality going on. There is clearly unintentional, at the very least, blood sacrifices, and there's clearly a lot of fire going on. That certainly would seem to create the conditions for magic. However, did it work? Maybe it didn't work because the dragon eggs were poisoned. That's and as a result, that is the thing which made the flames get hotter and hotter. Is that they're trying, this should work, it should work, and they're trying to make it. I don't know. I'm open to the idea that actually there was no magic. There was an attempt to do magic, but the only thing that actually happened was a thematic hatching of a new dragon. William Schneider. Hello, Robert. Were there red priestesses at Summerhall? Maybe even Melisandre? I saw a video recently where they were comparing the description of shadows with Melisandre, shadow babies, Azor Ahai, Eldrick Shadow Chaser, and the others, the way they move like shadows. The use of the word shadows seems to describe many magical and prophetic things in A Song of Ice and Fire. I've always liked the idea that Summerhall reawakened the others, or magic in general. Do you think that the same magic used at Summerhall could be what is used to stop the others? And do you think there is a connection in the shadows? Well, I mean, I don't know what video that is. I certainly haven't seen a video like that, so I can't really comment on that. Shadow. My initial take is that although George R. R. Martin does use, and he does do this, use words to specifically try and link things in your mind, I think that he uses shadow a lot for lots of different things, and some of them we think of and use quite regularly. So, for example, a short man can cast a long shadow. Varys says this. There's a time Melisandre tells Jon that his shadow is, I can't remember the exact words, tall upon the wall. George R. R. Martin uses shadow quite a lot as well to show somebody's influence. How their impact is their shadow, how far does their shadow go, and things like that. So I don't think he just uses it for one specific thing. You do also talk about, so were there red priests there? I wouldn't rule it out, but at the same time, we don't hear mention of them. We hear mention of pyromancers, we hear mention of sorcerers, but we don't know anymore. I mean, if there were, then they would be there. Obviously, this might help explain why the Septon was against this, but one would think that perhaps if a red priest were there, then they would not want to sort of what appears to be a quite a random hybrid ceremony, which is trying to honor the faith of the Seven whilst at the same time do Targaryen magic. If you throw a red priest in there as well, I suspect the red priest won't want to be honoring the Seven at all. So yeah, that doesn't hang quite right. We don't have any information to say no or yes, but there's certainly nothing that says definitely yes. And the other thing about Summerhall reawakening the others, or magic in general. Now, I will happily say I have flirted with this idea. It was quite a while ago, and I'm not willing to say I've given up on it completely. But the argument is that clearly something that looks like magic happened. Clearly something of plot significance happened, that brought about Rhaegar, who people were starting to see might be Azor Ahai reborn. Some people were starting to think that. That, you could argue, makes sense for something that might reawaken the others in some way. We don't know what's happened to the others, by the way. They were around thousands of years ago. Then they seem to have got defeated. The implication is they're chilling out in somewhere in the far north, in the lands of always winter. But at what point did they start coming back? If they're looking for a sign, then perhaps people in the south talking about Azor Ahai reborn might be sign that they're looking for, if they can sort of magically sense what's going on. So yes, that kind of works. It also, if you had to, and we don't know, but if you had to put a guess on when did the others start moving around in the haunted forest, then haunted forest, you know what I mean, in the sort of the lands north of the wall, when did that start happening? 40-ish years before the story feels roughly right, because Craster is probably the earliest indication. Certainly, it's more than a few years, because we've had to have time for Mance Raider to be rallying people around. They have to have, enough of them have had to have seen the others and got scared enough to want to form a huge group to be heading south. But before that, we get Craster, who clearly has set up this. He would see this as some kind of deal, but it's offerings to the cold gods. And how long has that been happening? Well, how long has Craster been there? We're not told exactly, but our best guess, looking at the description we have of him and how many daughter wives he has, is somewhere around 40 years, which kind of ties in with this. So all of that, that's kind of like a long list of slight imponderables, but 40-ish years sounds about right, which seems to kind of tie in with this. So at a kind of like a theoretical level, those bits do fit together, but I come around more to the conclusion that this wasn't some huge magical thing happened that alerted the world or woke up magic or something. Magic was really woken up when Dany's dragons came back. This was, as far as we can tell, a failed attempt to bring back dragons. So it wasn't the awakening magic thing. We're told in various different ways. Quaithe says to Dany, hey, in Karth, there's before your dragons were born, there was a fire magician trying to earn a little bit of money. He could barely do a few little fire tricks. Now he's building fiery ladders and climbing up them and all sorts of stuff, because the ambient level of magic in the world has gone up because the dragons are here. Not because 40 years ago somebody did something. So my instinct is that now probably no. I'm not willing to write it off. I like the idea, but probably no. Right, let's go to a question from Stephen, and saying, hi, Robert, do you think that Bloodraven watched the tragedy at Summerhall from afar? Could he have had an influence on the events in some way? Well, just to sort of put this in context, so this happens in the year 259. Bloodraven had been at the wall, had got himself promoted to being Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and then in the year 252, he heads north of the wall and disappears. We know that he ended up being hooked up, and had been clearly for quite some time hooked up to the Weirwood Network in what we think of now as Bloodraven's Cave. So by the time that Summerhall burned down, very probably he was there, hooked up to the Weirwood Network, having been trained by the Children of the Forest a little bit Bran, clearly a natural, but he learned relatively quickly. We don't know how long that span of time is. That particularly that last Bran chapter seems to stretch over quite some period of time. But certainly in those few years, Bloodraven could have learned how to do that. Might he have been paying attention to it? Well, yes-ish, if he can. He says that you can move beyond Weirwood trees, so surely he could have done that. He could certainly, if all of the Targaryens, we know that he tried to contact Targaryens in the past. He presumably would have been interested if the entire family gathered together. That would certainly be something he would want to know what was going on. And we do know, or we strongly guess, that he did have some influence at this point, in as much as the Woods Witch that we've been talking about. She came to King's Landing with Jenny of Oldstones. She was at Summerhall, and much later she becomes known as the Ghost of High Heart. So we see her, and she is very short, but with white skin and red eyes. Now, that's not the normal description of Children of the Forest, and we often think of her as being at least part Child of the Forest, because she is very small and gnarly, or I can't remember the exact words that is used. But it is also very clearly that's Bloodraven's colouring and imagery. He's got the pale white skin, red eye. And also Ghost, Jon's direwolf, has got white fur and red eyes, and the clear implication is that Bloodraven has been skin changing into Ghost for quite some time. So that is a hint of his influence. So I think the working assumption is that she was sent originally by Bloodraven to be giving this prophecy, to be saying that the prince that was promised is going to come from this line. And then we have the tragedy at Summerhall, where all of the Targaryens, except for the people in that line, get wiped out. That feels quite coincidental. Now, we don't know that it's all of the Targaryens except the people in that line, but the only Targaryens we hear about afterwards are the people in that specific line. So might he have had a hand in it? You know what I say, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Out of all of these people out there who we have this, might they have been involved? The one that feels most right is Bloodraven. I talked about this time period when the Targaryen family tree sort of was huge and then it came down. That was during Bloodraven's time, the most significant bit. It was something like 25 unexpected Targaryen and Blackfire, who were an offshoot of the Targaryens, obviously, family members died either directly at the hands of Bloodraven or in tragic and unexpected circumstances. It was something like 25 in 27 years. And that just feels too coincidental. And then you suddenly get this tragedy at Harrenhal getting rid of another huge amount of them. And it always seemed to be, let's prune this family tree down so that we get this exact line that runs through it. So do we have any direct evidence that it was Bloodraven? No. Do we know that a Bloodraven lackey was there, if lackey's the right word? Yeah, it seems to be. And do we know that this was seemingly in his interests? Yeah, it seems to be. There's also this notion that the Ghost of High Heart seems very affected by it, what happened. Most of these the other people who were there, they don't want to talk about it, but they carry on with their lives, as far as we can tell. And the Ghost of High Heart, has been clearly affected by this. When she sees Arya, her first thought is, I don't need any more grief. You're a killer. And she says, I gorged on grief at Summerhall. Gorged on grief. I ate my fill. I had everything that I possibly could there. And she seems almost like a figure broken by this. Because let's not forget, that was 40 years later. And to sort of say, I don't want you bringing me down because something that happened 40 years ago was just terrible. That's her saying she's still not got over it. Which implies to me that she saw things, or she realized that she inadvertently played a part in something, that she didn't just lose her best friend here. Something more tragic was going on. So, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but just as an example, what if Bloodraven manipulated her to be making the conflagration, the fire spread? Maybe he did that and she did not realize what she was doing until after it had happened. And so she's gorging on grief, not just because she's sad that her friends died, but her part in it was horrific. Maybe that's why she gorged on grief. As I say, I don't think that's necessarily what happened, but just as an example of a thing that might have happened. Um, I I always think Bloodraven might well be involved in things like this. Is the two things, and just I always say, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven, but it's when in doubt, blame Bloodraven if there are two possible motives, or one of two possible motives being met. The first one is pruning down the Targaryen family tree to be the right people left. That does definitely seem to be something that he wanted. And secondly, getting Jon in the right place and prepared and ready to be facing the others. That's the other thing that he seems to directly get involved in. Other stuff, not so much. But these ones, those were his aims. He was wanting, and they're really the same aim, because from his perspective, he sees Jon as the prince that was promised. And so anything he was doing to be trimming the Targaryen family tree was simply to get it right, so that Jon could be born, and so that once Jon had grown up, he could then guide Jon. That's the Bloodraven master plan working its way through. Scamelia saying, only just joining, so sorry. Sorry if this has already been covered. Well, welcome. But do you think Bloodraven intended Summerhall to produce Rhaegar to produce Jon, or he had a vague idea that this would have to happen? Yeah, well, you're coming at exactly the right time, because I'm talking about Bloodraven now. And I was sort of talking about this. I think that Bloodraven's overall plan seems to have been that we get this from the line of Eris and Rhaella. You get the prince that was promised, and he wants the prince that was promised, I think, forming the Song of Ice and Fire, the union of Targaryen and Stark. And so what happens here, if we're to play this when in doubt, blame Bloodraven game, which I love playing, then we're saying, okay, Bloodraven wants the Targaryen line just to be this one line, because that's where he thinks this savior is going to be coming from, and he wants to get rid of the rest, so they don't complicate things and they're not having civil wars and things like that. Obviously, a civil war happened anyway, but that's the idea. And once they get to that line that the prince was promised from, then they just marry each other. So you're not mixing the bloodline. The bloodline is staying pure in inverted commas. So I think the short answer is we don't have evidence, but that's what the implication is. Let's go to Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola to you. Who was the Maester at Summerhall during the time of the tragedy? Could he have played a role in how events unfolded? Well, this is an interesting one. I mean, I've already checked Corso. Um, but if you've got your copy of The World of Ice and Fire to hand, you may find that that scrap of paper, the letter that I was talking about, the one with those with the ink splots and just a few random words left on it, you may find that your copy of The World of Ice and Fire talks about this coming from Gildane, and Gildane died. If you do, that's because you've got one of the older editions of The World of Ice and Fire. George R. Martin changed this. He changed this so in later editions, we get this guy called Maester Corso. Now, why did he change this? The answer we have got, that I personally see no reason to doubt, is that he decided that he wanted, having got The World of Ice and Fire, he wanted Fire and Blood, and he wanted that written as an in-world Maester written history, and he wanted Gildane to have written it. But he then realised that he's got a in-world Gildane dying at Summerhall, and he wants Fire and Blood to have two parts, taking it all the way up to the present, and so he couldn't be writing the history of that time. So he said, okay, I'm just going to change out the names. So it's not Gildane who was there. Gildane's actually another guy who's a historian writing these history books, and let's get Corso in there, who was the Maester. Now, you may have a conspiracy theory that, oh, okay, so this is the Maesters changing history in world or something. If that is the case, then yeah, hat tip to George R. Martin. But as it stands, this rings true to me that this is just simply, part of the writing process, that he wanted Gildane to be writing that book in world. So that's who they are. Does that make a difference? Well, if it was Gildane, then perhaps we might have more of an interest in this, in as much as he's somebody who implicitly we know a lot more of their views. Because we see what they write, we see the kind of language they use, and that might lead us to see his contribution in the world in a slightly different way. But because we've got this now being this Maester called Corso, and we know nothing about him at all apart from this, he's clearly just invented to have another name to be this person here. That strikes me that perhaps this means it's not as important that this is a Maester that we're aware of, and therefore less important that, or less likely that the Maesters were actively involved. The only real implication I think we have here is that Corso witnessed stuff. He saw things. He saw what happened between the King Septon and the king, whether it was actually an argument or just a disagreement. He saw it. He saw what was brought, who was there. He saw that they had some wildfire. He saw pyromancers had arrived. He also saw Dunk doing some act of heroism. He saw a lot of what was going on, but we'll never know any more about him until, I suspect, we get to one of the last Dunk and Egg stories, and then suddenly we'll be, oh, so this is that guy. Let's go to Michelle Ramo saying, Hi, Robert. Hope all is well with you and Dan. It is. Thank you. Who do you think was there at Summerhall? There is still Rael and Dieren's daughter, Vaela. who are most likely still alive at this time, along with other family members. We don't know when Betha Blackwood died. That's Egg's wife, for example. If you had to take your best guess, who do you think were in attendance? Well, my best guess is based on two facts. The first is who we read about afterwards, which is just that one line, and no other Targaryens. The fact that we don't read about them doesn't mean that they don't exist in that time, but it does mean they weren't doing particularly important or interesting things. That's the first bit. And then the second bit is that phrase we have from that letter that says the blood, or it doesn't actually say the, it says HE, but the implication was that we broke in halfway through the sentence, the blood of the dragon gathered in one place. Now, you could start that sentence with, and most of the blood of the dragon gathered in one place. It doesn't work very well as a sentence to say a couple of the blood of the dragon gathered in one place, because that's just like some Targaryens, or even a few of the blood of the dragon gathered in one place. The way the sentence is structured seems to work either with all of the blood of the dragon or most of the blood of the dragon gathered in one place. I think one absentee is Shira Seastar, and I think that she was the person he sent over to Ashai. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole this time. If you've watched my videos on Quaithe and the like, then you'll know what I thought was going on there. But she, I don't know exactly how old she would have been at this point, but she would have been old. But we do know that she kept herself allegedly looking youthful through magical means. So there's a fair chance that she was still alive at the time. So who? Yes, I think all of them. Michelle Ramo saying, Egg's Septon told him that the Seven would not appreciate the use of 7 eggs as an honor to them. Do you think Summerhall could have been a punishment by the Seven for the arrogance of the Targaryens for trying to bring dragons back into the world? Thank you for all you do. So again, this is another line we've got here. The king's own Septon had warned, and we're not told what warning it was. I think that it seems unlikely that it was kind of like a threat. If you do this, in the same way that way back at the beginning of Targaryen rule, then it was very much the Faith of the Seven were issuing threats to the Targaryens. If you do this, then we will call out all of our warriors and start attacking Targaryen interests. That's not what the tone of this is. But you might well see a pious person, a pious Septon, saying the gods will not be happy. So if you're saying, then, might this fire have been caused by the faith of the Seven or the Seven themselves in one way? Being actually caused by the gods, I don't think George R. Martin will. He's been very clear. We're never going to see the gods or see the direct action intervention of a god in this story. So, given the fact that what happens at the tragedy at Summerhall is going to be in a story, in a Dunk and Egg story, I suspect we're not going to have as the dramatic finale of that, and Egg is there trying to make the dragon eggs hatch, and then 7 heavenly figures suddenly appear and start pointing fingers and setting fire to things. That, I'm not saying that's what you suggest, by the way, but I'm sort of exaggerating for effect. That is not going to happen. Might it be one of those things where we could attribute it to the faith, and perhaps the Septons would do and say this was the faith. This was the gods announcing their justice. I suppose you could, but I think you would have to say that's pretty harsh justice, given the fact that this wasn't just. I mean, Egg seems to have been the driving force here, but he's not. He's far from the only person who dies. We know of a few other named characters who die, but there will have been dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of servants, by the sounds of it, who died in this, who had absolutely nothing to do with it. So it would appear to be quite a harsh judgment. But might the Faith themselves have done this? Like the Septons, might they have tried to do it? Well, perhaps, but this doesn't seem to be fire. Pardon me, not really their weapon of choice. Let's put it that way. So it doesn't feel like them. And then finally, the other point you would have to make was you would have to say that there is a consistency issue going on here, which is that um, we're told that Baelor the Blessed, he tried to hatch dragon eggs by praying over them to the Seven. Now, he wasn't immediately struck down. In fact, he was recognized as being an incredibly holy man. So that there would be no internal consistency here among the characters if that were what happened. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's definitely not how it happened, but for me, that seems one of the more unlikely ones. Um, right, let's go to Corvus Corax. Good evening, Robert and Dan. Slight tinfoil, but what if the ritual at Summerhall worked and an egg hatched, but it was a worm or a wyvern, or wyvern? Everyone seems to pronounce that one slightly different. Something dragon adjacent. The resulting destruction would be similar, no? Um, well, potentially, yes. Because if we have wildfire, and we do seem to have wildfire, all we need is somebody putting a torch in the wrong place, firing some fire in the wrong direction, and yes, the whole thing could go terribly wrong. Um, so possibly, my instinct though is that these eggs, we know they were jealously guarded by the Targaryens, even though they had been decades without hatching. The Targaryens, because they were firstly, they were valuable. Secondly, they were some kind of almost a symbol of legitimacy for them. They're Targaryens, they're associated with dragons. And thirdly, they kept on getting this idea that maybe this time they could hatch them. So the Targaryens kept a close hold of their dragon eggs, apart from Aegon the Fourth, who distributed a couple for his own purposes. Now, as a result, the Targaryens will have been aware that these are dragon eggs, not dragon adjacent eggs. In particular, one of them was almost certainly Egg's own egg, the egg that he had been given in his cradle. And then other Targaryens had been given in their cradles. And so it's not just a matter of, well, we found some eggs. That's my egg that I've had all my life. They will have known it. So it feels unlikely. Is it possible? Again, like all of these things, we don't know enough to say, well, that definitely didn't happen, but it feels unlikely. Um, and just in terms of the hatching thing, George R. R. Martin has used very strong language to describe what happened with Dany and the hatching of her eggs. He said that was unique and marvelous, among other things. And it's miraculous, sorry, I should say. The clear implication is that you couldn't do the same thing again just by trying to replicate it. So whatever was happening there at Summerhall, I think the implication from George R. R. Martin is the eggs did not hatch. because it was unique and miraculous that when Dany did something very similar, the eggs did hatch. And let's go to Lady Vaughan-Strauss saying, "Hello, Robert and Dan. Besides being born during the tragedy at Summerhall, what would you say it was about Rhaegar's personality and personal knowledge that caused him to keep coming back to it?" Well, I've covered this a little bit, but I thought I would, and just to reiterate the points that I made earlier. Firstly, there is a real obvious human thing here that every single time he had his birthday, his name day, he will have been reminded of the fact that as he was born, most of his family were killed in a tragic accident. That would weigh heavily on you. So there's a human aspect to this. There's also being driven by the belief that you're the chosen one because of what happened. So that's another thing. But then I just wanted to, I was going to say to shout out a theory, but I realised that I'm going to give the most vague directions to where this is from. I can't remember the person who it's from. I want to give full credit. If somebody in the chat can hunt this down in the next 2 minutes, then I would be very happy to name check who this was. But I haven't seen it for ages. But I think it was like on a Reddit forum or somewhere like that. Somebody came up with this idea that the reason why Rhaegar kept on going back there was because he was learning more and more from the Ghost of High Heart, the Woods Witch, who was there. And that kind of feels right, because she said, first of all, she we think was at Summerhall. What happened to her? Asked Dany. Summerhall, says Sebastian. So the implication is that she was there. And she says she gorged on grief. Now, that kind of implies not just like a one-off, because grief is something you have after the event, not what's going on. She was not, I'm still in shock from what happened. It was that I gorged on grief at Summerhall, which seems to imply that she was grieving at Summerhall. When the fires have gone and everyone has left, she's still there. And that kind of echoes this idea that when she's called the Ghost of High Heart, she's at High Heart. She's just, yes, she's got the white skin, which makes her feel quite ghostly, but she's just sort of like hanging around like a ghost from the past. That kind of feeling that she is there is just hanging around Summerhall. Again, feels quite good. But if she is tied in with Bloodraven, as her colouring would seem to imply, she would almost, and she knows about the prince that was promised. She was there. Rhaegar would have run into her. He repeatedly went back, and he went on his own. So that's an interesting detail. Why would he go on his own? He's meeting someone perhaps he doesn't want people to know that he's talking to. So he goes there. She tells him things. He knows who she is. He obviously wants to connect with her because she's someone, firstly, connected in with this time of his birth when all his family died, but also she's the person who gave this prince that was promised prophecy that at the time he thought applied to him directly. And this is a point slightly overlooked when we're saying that Rhaegar thought that he was the prince that was promised. It comes across to start with as a little big headed of you. Just you assume this must be you, because there were salt and smoke, tears in eyes. That's his salt, I guess. So smoke from the fire, I guess. So it does feel like a little bit of a reach. But when you realize that if you've been told that the prince that was promised must come from the line of your parents, and you were an only child, and you are now a teenager as an only child, and your parents have 6, 7 times tried to have a child, but the child did not survive beyond childhood, you think you're the only one. You think you're the only person who is of the line of your parents. Suddenly, it's not a matter of, oh, I think this might be about me. It's who else could it be? It has to be me. So if he is there growing up thinking he must be the prince that was promised, maybe he's even heard that she is down there, this woman who gave this prophecy about the line that the prince that was promised must come from. Maybe he headed down there specifically to go and speak to her. If so, that kind of makes sense why he went on his own, why he stayed there for a while each time and then came back. And if you want an added layer to this, whenever he came back, we're told that he came back with a new song, not just a song about Summerhall, but a sad song about kings and I can't remember exactly what it was that Barristan said, but it's something like kings and sorrow and death or something like that, which could be about Summerhall, but it could be a lot wider than that. And so this theory goes, and I'll have a check at the moment in the chat just to see whether anyone could track down this elusive post. This theory goes that she told him the Song of Ice and Fire, and he turned it into an actual song. And when we get to, because it was a prophecy, but he's turned it into an actual song because he plays the harp. And when we get to that vision that Dany has of him and Elia, and he's got his newborn son called Aegon, and Elia asks him, will you write a song for him? And he says, no, he's got a song. His is the Song of Ice and Fire. That's the song that he's composed that song already based on the prophecy that he's already got. So that all ties in for me. And there's one other layer to this that it's one of those throwaway lines that you think, well, that might mean nothing or it might mean everything. When you get in the world of Ice and Fire, you get a description of what happened in the build-up to Robert's Rebellion. You read about this really cold winter, second winter. We get the year of the fall spring. It's all nice and bright and sunny, and then winter comes back really harsh and cold. And then when that happens, Rhaegar sets out from Dragonstone with a few of his closest allies, we're told. And this makes sense for, as a complete aside, he thinks that this is about to happen now. He thinks that the signs are it's winter, an unexpected winter has happened. They're not thinking it's a full spring. They're thinking this is an unexpected winter. He thinks that this is it, the sign. We need to hurry things along with this prophecy. And so he then heads out. But the line which it kind of resounds with me is that he set out on the journey which would eventually end up with him picking up Lyanna near Harrenhal. It would end up with that. It's the phrasing is a bit odd because it's like that implies he didn't just go there direct, which is what we kind of assume. Is he leaves, he goes, he picks her up, and they head off. But no, he ends up there, which implies he went somewhere else first. Where on earth might he have gone first? Might he have headed off back to Summerhall, which seems to be his place? Might he have headed off to the person who he may well view as this kind of prophet, wise woman? And might he have consulted her? And might she have said, go to Lyanna? It's a slightly different way of looking at these things, but it kind of adds up. It kind of makes sense. If he did go somewhere, where else would he have gone? Uh, Charis Ballerina, thank you very much. This is yes, this was from Reddit, A Song of Ice and Fire, and the username there, Trash Herald, TR4SH underscore HEROLD. Thank you very much. Hat tip to you, whoever you are. I really do enjoy that. So yeah, that's Maura Lee saying for Bloodraven and the Prince that was promised. Thank you very much, Amara. Hugely appreciate that. And let's have a quick flick through the chat, seeing agree. Weirwood just saying hi in the halls of the kings that have gone. Jenny will dance with his ghost or her ghosts. Yeah, absolutely. That's Jenny's song. Let's go to a question from, where were we up to? Ranabim Mitra saying, salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. I hope you're doing well. We are. We think of the hatching of dragon eggs as normal sounding, but when you look at the descriptions used during Danny's egg hatching, the eggs are described to be almost exploding open. It's tinfoil, but can you imagine the dragon eggs being bombs if the hatching process was conducted in a manner wherein all the elements were not so aligned as per Drogo's pyre? As in, could the explosions at Summerhall be caused by wildfire, making the 7 dragon eggs explode instead of hatching? Yeah, or perhaps to take it to the logical place based on what we said before, if they were poisoned dragon eggs, then maybe they did go to stone. I mean, the idea that the dragon eggs have gone to stone, Danny's dragon eggs were told they're stone eggs because, I mean, nobody sort of cracked them open to have a look to see what's going on inside, but they're as heavy as that, they're as cold as stone, they feel like stone. Maybe that's what happens with dragon eggs, in the same way that weirwood trees seem to go almost stone-like, as hard as stone. So if a dragon egg that's been around, as some of those might have been, for a couple of 100 years, and it had been poisoned, so the dragon cannot develop. So there's no, unlike with Danny's dragon eggs, where there clearly was something magical going on. Nobody else could feel them. Danny could feel them. They were warm to touch for Danny, but for everyone else, no, they just thought they just seemed normal. Maybe if they did seem normal, because they were normal, as in stone-like, and maybe that's what does happen with an incredibly hot stone. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask who who would know these things. Geologists, mineralogists, mineralogists. If there's somebody, there's always people with very excellent and esoteric bits of knowledge in the chat. If there is somebody there in the chat that can say what would happen to a stone that got really superheated, might it kind of break apart? I like this idea, and a bit. It's for me, the tweak, I would say, it's not a matter of like they got the constituent parts of the ritual wrong. It was never going to work because they were poisoned dragon eggs, and the dragons have gone. And this wasn't the miraculous, unique moment as with Danny. Chaos Ballerina, had the ritual worked and 7 dragons were born, who do you think would bond with a dragon? Who in the family would even be allowed to try? Well, I mean, fantastic question. So, I think you have 4 obvious candidates. The king would have to have a dragon. The heir would have to have a dragon. The heir's heir would have to have a dragon. The newborn child, who is the heir's heir, would have to have a dragon. So those 4 would all have dragons because that is the line of succession in the Targaryens. Beyond that, I mean, who else is there? You I suppose it depends on which other Targaryens are around, which we're not told hugely. I think the question would be whether you would give um, Duncan the Small, Egg's oldest son, who came out of the line of succession, so he could marry Jenny of Oldstones. Would you allow him a dragon? I suspect probably Egg would, because he would be somebody that he knew he could trust absolutely. And who knows what happens when you have a dragon. So that gives you five. The other two, I think my instinct would be they probably would leave them just getting older. They would have to sort of rebuild the dragon pit or something along those lines. And then they would hope that Eris and Rhaella had more children quite soon. And they would then be able to claim those dragons. But yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, would Egg have thought about it? Probably. If he thought that it was going to work, he would have to have made some kind of decision. Right, let's go to Rastler. Good day, Robert. I hope you and Dan the dog are well. It was said that Jenny of Oldstones was a witch. Do you believe there's any truth to this? And what was her connection to the ghost of High Heart? Is there a deeper connection than just being friends? Well, I mean, we don't know this, and almost all we know about this is via the Maesters, who have a long and inglorious track history of describing any woman that they don't like as being um, a witch or a magic user, a dark magic user of some kind. Um, Clearly, some reason had to be given why the heir to the throne would throw it all away to marry some uh, commoner that they didn't really know who she was. And so the idea that he had been bewitched, it was an easy one to take hold, which means the implication is that she was doing it. Now, is that the case? I mean, my instinct is more that this is the Woods Witch doing things. Perhaps on behalf of Bloodraven, we don't know. But was she herself a magic user? Possibly not. It's entirely possible that she was just somebody who, um, I mean, call me an old romantic, but what's wrong with the fact maybe they did just fall in love? These things happen. Maybe they met, and it's like he's there thinking, I don't really love that high tower woman. Why? I don't want to marry her. What's more important to me? There's plenty of other people who can take the throne if I don't want to have it. What's more important to me? My own personal happiness? I'm doing it. So I think it kind of makes sense that he cannot bear to spend his life without this woman that he's now in love with. So yeah, I don't see the need for there to be a magic other than the idea that Bloodraven is somehow involved in here, and he wouldn't want to take any chances. Callie Summers, what are your thoughts on how Dunk's foot might come into play at Summerhall? I recently have been thinking that Dunk may end up causing the fire. He definitely also did something valorous that saved people. But if Bloodraven or Bran planned for trimming the Targaryen tree, Dunk might have inadvertently been the proximate cause. The balancing of the scales for Dunk's foot isn't the people he saved at Summerhall, it was for the eventual prince who was promised. Okay, so for people who don't know, this is actually one of my favourite bits of A Song of Ice and Fire theorising. Dunk's foot. I think I did a video on this ages ago, taking it down for various reasons. I will put it back up again probably before the Duncan Night of the Seven Kingdoms stuff comes up. But in spoilers, I suppose, for Night of the Seven Kingdoms, in the Hedge Knight, Dunk goes in to save Tansel Tutor from the unwanted advances of Aerion Targaryen. And Dunk does this by punching and kicking Aerion. And Aerion holds up his rights and basically says, okay, you attacked a Targaryen. You're going to lose your foot because you kicked me. And Dunk is basically slung into prison. But then he's kind of given this advice, well, we could have a trial of the seven, just to tell, because everybody knew this was Aerion being a bully. They knew what he was like. They knew that Dunk was actually just throwing himself in there in order to do the right thing, save somebody who's being harassed. And now he was going to have his foot chopped off. And so we then get this trial of the seven. And in this trial of the seven, 3 people die, including Baelor Breakspear, who was the heir to the throne. So following that, Dunk has this kind of bit of introspection, and he's talking. I mean, initially he's talking to Maekar, who is Egg's father, and he's talking about his foot, because it's all coming down to save his foot. This happened and people died. And he says, mightn't it be that some morrow will come when I'll have need of that foot, when the realm will need that foot, even more than a prince's life? And the prince's life is the life that was lost, Baelor's life that was lost, basically saving his foot. And he's thinking, how is my foot worth the life of a prince? And another time he says, 3 good men dead to save a hedge knight's foot. It made no sense and never had. Take a lesson from that, Lunk. It is not for the likes of you to mess about with dragons or their eggs. Now, that obviously links across to Summerhall. This not with you to mess about with dragons or their eggs, because he will be right in the middle of messing about with dragons and their eggs. But this idea that his foot might someday, because don't forget, that's the first book in the series, and George R. R. Martin, like a good writer, he's going to try and create this arc that works across the entire Dunk and Egg series, and this is one of those bits of the arc, that the foot, he's going to be pondering the foot that the heir to a prince, a Targaryen prince, died for that foot. He will then be able to use that foot in some way to save, in service of the Empire, to save a prince. That's the kind of the logical arc we've got going on here. So where we go with this is this idea that if we've got this logical arc that this foot has to save a prince, and that's going to happen at the end of the story, and we know that at Summerhall he does some deed of valor that saves lives, what might that be? So I think probably the fan favorite theory, it's certainly my favorite theory, is that somehow he uses that foot to save Rhaella, who's then going to give birth to Rhaegar. Does he shove it into a door to stop it from slamming shut, allowing them to get out? Perhaps. That would be a very clear example of a foot which had been saved by the death of a prince, saving the life of a prince. It also would provide an echo to the person we all think is probably one of his descendants, Hodor, who is obviously going to have his hold the door moment. So I think that's my working assumption, is how this all works together. Your idea that perhaps he might have caused it, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think one of the things with Dunk that I've talked about a lot of times, I still haven't quite conceptualized it properly, but I seem to always manage to kind of express the feeling, and you kind of understand the feeling, is that Dunk is not magical. He doesn't seem to be this person who is necessarily himself being the protagonist to force events to happen, but events happen around him. He is, and the best expression I have, if you've been watching The Wheel of Time, if you've read the Wheel of Time's Wheel of Time books, he is Taviran. He is this character who can in that universe, we're drifting away here a bit. In that universe, then it's the wheel of time is this wheel, a loom, creating this kind of tapestry of history as it goes along. And most people are just like, the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. They're just part of it. They can't do anything. But occasionally, these exceptional individuals come along, the Taviran, who their actions do impact on the pattern that is being forced, that is being created. And that seems to be where Dunk is. He's not necessarily the person, he's not behind the second Blackfire rebellion, but he happens to be there when that is happening. And him being there does shift and change events. And you see Bloodraven is there saying, what on earth are you doing here? I don't understand why you are here. And then Dunk basically says, well, we just kind of stumbled into it. And Bloodraven's like, okay. And then you just happened when the Great Spring Sickness happened and lots of Targaryens were dying. You happened to be in the one part of the Seven Kingdoms where people weren't dying in Dawn. Okay. And then before that, you just happened to be stumbling upon Egg, who'd been near this inn. Not knowing that he was a Targaryen, and then you just happened to be there at a time and with an intervention into a moment that led to the death of the Crown Prince, and then later on he will happen to be in different places where other momentous things happen. It's like events swirl around him, which is all, it's just sort of the colour around the piece to say, what's up with Dunk's foot? I think George R. R. Martin is going to bring this all the way around. I don't think he's going to be causing the fire. I think he might be cautioning against it, but I think that he will end up dying a heroic death, saving people's lives with his foot in the door. Right, let's have a quick flick. The chat. Somebody's saying, anyone else fall asleep to Robert? Don't worry, you're not the only one. I hope you have a great night's rest. Let's go to Kelly. Kelly Summers. Just did your question. A comma saying, I always felt the Maester's conspiracy theory to be very compelling. Could the tragedy of Summerhall be enabled by the Maesters somehow? I sort of covered this a little bit earlier, actually, so I won't go over the exact same ground. I think for those who haven't really come across the Maesters, Great Maester Conspiracy, I don't think we've come across a sort of a catchy name yet for this. Let's call it the Great Maester's Conspiracy. The idea is, as Maester Marwyn says, Archmaester Marwyn says, who do you think killed the dragons the last time? Implication being it was the Maesters. So they got rid of the, certainly, I mean, I have my suspicions that they might have had a hand in the doom of Valyria. But even if that's not the case, in getting rid of the dragons after the Dance of the Dragons, I definitely think that they were involved in that. And then you have to say, if they thought that Dunk was actually finding the right formula to bring back dragons, then yeah, I think they probably would have done something to stop it. But is two things. Is fire really the way that they would have done that? I think if we even if we have a very low view of maesters, they do know stuff. And I think that if some ritual was taking place to make dragon eggs hatch, the maesters would not say, and do you know how we stop this? Let's get more fire going. Uh, because that would be against, they would know that's the exact wrong thing. The way to stop it happening is to stop the fire, not make there be more fire. So for that reason, and the fact that if we believe the Great Maester Conspiracy, we think that they already think those eggs are not going to hatch because they're poisoned, they wouldn't have even had to bother. Catherine Furseth saying, I wonder if you could talk about the history of Summerhall itself. Can you describe it? And most of all, did it have a weirwood tree? If magic was performed, do you see any old gods or weirwood magic taking place there? The connection would surely have been the role of the Woods Witch and Jenny of Oldstones. Was there something sinister going on with them and their role? Is there a connection with the Woods Witch and Rhaegar's discovery of ice and fire? Thanks. I've actually answered quite a lot of this with questions from the chat and things like that. So I'll pick up on the Weirwood thing though. We don't have any information about whether there was a Weirwood there. If it would kind of make sense that they might have done one, but because that was just like that was the way that if you wanted to, if you were building a sort of a castle or something like that, you would show your respect for the traditions of that might have been there before by having a weirwood tree. But the fact it is where it is, and the whole point of why it was first built, as I said right at the very beginning of the stream, why it was first built was to kind of like help Dornish Seven Kingdoms relationships along. The idea was to make that feel almost Dornish, and they don't really do weirwood trees in Dorne. So, whereas yes, it would make sense, I don't think there's an overwhelming imperative that there had to have been. If there was one there, it will probably be a relatively young one. They will have planted there, and we certainly don't hear about it at all. Now, might the Weirwood Network have been involved in this? Well, like with the Maesters, I think if Bloodraven is involved in this, and I think that that has to be a working assumption, if this is the Weirwood Network at this point in time, certainly he will also be aware that the last thing you want if you're trying to stop dragons being hatched is more fire. So that doesn't work. And the Weirwood Network more broadly, they're not pro-fire. Let's put it that way. Most trees are kind of anti-fire. So I suspect that their default thought was not, let's try and burn this whole place down. Greek Weirwood asking if we've ever been to Summerhall's Godswood in anyone's memories. We've not been to Summerhall full stop in anyone's memories. No one, I mean, this was long enough ago that there's only a limited number of people who might have been there. But no, we don't read about that. Certainly, Egg doesn't ever think about a Weirwood tree. Perhaps we might, if we do get the long-awaited Winterfell-based Duncan Egg story, maybe he will go to the Godswood in Winterfell, or actually, perhaps we'll even see. Or I just had this thought. I must have had this thought before, but we get Bran when he's going back through the Weirwood tree in Winterfell, and he sees various images. One of those images is a woman on her tiptoes reaching up to kiss a very tall knight, and everyone thinks, that must be Dunk, and maybe that's Old Man, when she was young man. But If that was in front of the Weirwood tree, maybe we'll see that happen in that story. That would be quite impressive, and I do wonder whether or not Dunk has any impressions of that Weirwood tree. But anyway, we may hear Egg talk about if there is a Weirwood tree where he grew up, he might compare it in his mind to that. Andrew K saying it's just crazy coincidental that the surviving bloodline is seemingly the specific prophetic one preserved, while other Targ lines are specifically eliminated at Summerhall. Yep, it's one of those things where, like most of those unexpected Targaryen deaths during that period, once or twice you could call coincidence, but the vast amount of times that everything except this one line gets eliminated, it seems to go beyond just coincidence. Samantha Drake in the chat saying, would Rhaegar have been stillborn if he wasn't born at Summerhall? Rhaella was so young and had problems having other children. Did the magic at Summerhall save them? Yeah, I mean, again, this is a theory I will happily buy into. I mean, I talked a little bit earlier that I'm open to the idea that no magic at all happened here. That's absolutely fine. I'm also open to the idea that the magic did happen and the magic was what saved Rhaegar in some way. And it's not just symbolic, but this is the dragon was given birth and survived because of that. I mean, we have to say Rhaella was. I don't know quite the right terminology here, but it wasn't that she could not have children because she could have children because she had much later Viserys and Daenerys. So it's not that there was something wrong with her physiology that prevented her from having children. She could have children. It's just that there were a lot of failed pregnancies and the like in the years that followed Rhaegar. Which again, perhaps you could kind of like George R. R. Martin doesn't like breaking down magic and sort of explaining it, but the kind of the aftershocks of the marriage or of the marriage of the magic, perhaps that affected things in some way. That feels quite a kind of a George R. R. Martin thing. Let's go to Keith Boynton. What are the odds we'll get more information about Summerhall from the Ghost of High Heart at some point? Seems like she was intimately connected with those events, and if she pops up again in the Riverlands plotline, I don't know. Am I just wish casting? Well, I mean, yes, you are wish casting, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I also would love to hear more from the Ghost of High Heart. I think the places we're more likely to hear about Summerhall from are more Duncan Egg stories. We at some point, even before the end, then we're going to get some more information about Summerhall because this is apparently Dunk's favorite palace, favorite place to hang out. So we will get more. And then, secondly, from Fire and Blood Part 2, Blood and Fire, the George R. R. Martin. Whenever I say things like he said he's going to do the Winds of Winter first before he does anything else, yeah, he does change. I mean, this isn't a dig at him in any way, shape, or form. He does change his priorities over time. I can remember a time when it was I'm going to be prioritizing the Winds of Winter and nothing else. Then it was like, oh, I've just written Fire and Blood, just boom, just happened. And then it's like I go back and that's my only priority. Then it was like everything is my priority, and then it was back to my priority is Winds of Winter, and then the last update ish he gave, he said he had been writing a bit more of this was a while ago, so this isn't breaking news in any way, shape, or form. Months ago, he said that he had been writing some of the Winds of Winter and also a few pages of Blood and Fire. Um, my working theory is that George R. R. Martin finds it easier to write that kind of um, history book like Fire and Blood than he does The Winds of Winter. We all know the reasons why. The Winds of Winter is a particularly hard book to write. He has my complete sympathy with this. But also something like Fire and Blood, when you read it, if there are things that he's not 100% sure exactly how how he wants things to fit together, he doesn't actually have to come to a conclusion on them. He can write it, and he did write it many times. I'm not saying this was the reason why he wrote it this way, but it just makes the writing process easier. Is he can say, well, Mushroom tells us that this is what happened, and then Orwell tells us that this is what happened, and then Munkin tells us that this is, and he can say, oh, I think probably this is right, and then he moves on without ever unambiguously showing us what happened in an event. He just tells us three different people's interpretations of what might have happened, and then he moves on. So that makes for a lot less stressful a writing experience for him, I think, where he doesn't have to tie down all of these little loose ends. He can leave things hanging, and he can write. So he could write Blood and Fire if he wanted to. He could tell the story leading up to the tragedy at Summerhall, and not include much more information than we've already got in the world of Ice and Fire. He would probably have to give us a little bit more information about who was there. He would have to give us information more about who died, who survived, things like that. But in terms of what actually caused it, he could stick with this "and the people who survived don't want to tell us" line, and that would be okay. So anyway, because he does, I would not rule out the idea that at some point in a year or two's time, we suddenly get this, and oopsie, I've been writing Blood and Fire. Expect that to come out. Don't be surprised if that's the case. Also, do not be surprised if we get a Duncan Egg story. Because he is very aware and does not want the same thing to happen again with the Duncan Egg stories with the Knights of the Seven Kingdoms that happened with Game of Thrones, with the TV show overtaking the books. Casto saying nearly every line in the main series is triple layered with symbolism and foreshadowing, so it makes sense that it's been difficult to keep that up. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, I have a lot of sympathy for him. Andrew Kay pointing out that Blood and Fire will require much more effort because Fire and Blood had previous novellas to use and expanding of the world book to go off of. Yes, I mean, you're right. If it goes all the way up to the end, though, for the Duncan Egg period and the Eris period leading up to Robert's Rebellion, there's actually a lot written in the world of Ice and Fire about all of that period, and obviously in the Duncan Egg stories. So those bits are largely already done. Um, I mean, the point I'm making is not that he will definitely produce these things before he produces the Winds of Winter. I'm just saying I think compared to the Winds of Winter, he finds those things easier to write. Okay, let's go to I've got two more questions from my patrons. So now is a good time to drop more things into the chat. And I will try and get through as much of that as I possibly can. Callie Summers saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you are doing well. It's been a while since I brought you some truly crackpot tinfoil, but I'm back." Thank you, Callie. I appreciate it. "We love to blame Bloodraven for all these events that have happened, but you can't spell Bloodraven without Bran interwoven throughout. And you've helpfully capitalized, but the first, last, and middle two letters of Bloodraven are indeed Bran. Bloodraven can't affect the past, though we know that Bran can, if only subtly. Perhaps he can send people dreams, maybe even dragon dreams, going back all the way to Daenerys the Dreamer. Why not Bloodraven? He talks a lot about the things that Bran will see, but doesn't mention an ability to influence anyone. A big omission if he knew. Bloodraven's rumoured sorcery seems to just be about knowing the future via his dreams. Who sends the dreams, if not Bran? It's a semi-closed time loop where he causes himself to get the power to save himself in the past, like Terminator. Bloodraven, like Hodor and Jojen, will eventually be sacrificed for Bran to survive. We can still blame Bloodraven for a lot, but it would all be Bran's influence. So, what do you think? Let me know in the chat what you think. I mean, I think this is a great bit of tinfoil. I mean, it's very hard to disprove it. I don't think that's what's happening. The kind of the bootstrap paradox thing. Um, uh, I think you can do it on small loops, by which I mean the Hodor kind of thing. But if you start making it a bigger one, then that suddenly becomes the focus of the entire plot. And I don't think George R. R. Martin wants that to be the case, because he doesn't need it to be the case, if that makes sense. Um, it's a nice idea, and it does. I mean, it's not that it doesn't work. It's just maybe it's just that I personally don't like it. And I think Bloodraven does influence events in the present quite a lot of the time through the way that he plants dreams. He certainly has planted a dream with Jon, I think. Anyway, certainly he's gone to Bran in Bran's dreams, and he's probably gone into other people's dreams as well. So he is proactive and doing things. The only thing is, he doesn't think that he can go back in time and influence things in the past, whereas Bran seems to have experienced that you can, albeit in a small way. Okay, let's go to Lady Pushkins. Oh, Kelly Summers is just in the chat. Hi there, Kelly, saying feels like the sort of Twilight Zone twist George R. R. Martin might enjoy. Yes, it might. I mean, I think though he's very clear that he's trying to keep this very much fantasy, not sci-fi. He often points out in interviews when people come up with kind of sci-fi answers to various things, like why the seasons are out of balance, that kind of thing. He's very clear, this is a fantasy series. Look for fantasy answers, not sci-fi answers. So, whereas this is still, you could argue, on the fantasy side, it does, when you start turning this into a time travel story rather than this being a story that is just told as is in the way that it is told, then that's starting to veer more, for me, towards the kind of the sci-fi feel, if not actuality. I mean, the other thing I think I would just pick up on that actually is when you're asking about Bran, can Bran send dragon dreams? I think a year ago I'd have said, no, these are clearly very separate things. Being in the Weirwood Network, being a green seer is very different to dragon dreams. House of the Dragon, which is obviously semi-canon rather than there's no indication that George R. R. Martin gave a thumbs up to any of this. But the whatever it was, last episode, penultimate episode of season 2, when you get first of all, you get Daemon going in, having his Weirwood visions in through the Weirwood Network, and then, I mean, that's one thing. Another one is what follows, which is when he's in there, it seems very clear that Helena is already in there as well, which means that her dragon dreams are not just dragon dreams, they're connected in some way to the Weirwood Network and Greenseer Network, which radically changes. This didn't get really picked up on that much at the time, it has to be said, but it radically changes our understanding of how these things operate, if that's true in the books. My instinct is that wasn't something that was cleared through George R. R. Martin, but they thought it looked quite cool and they went with it. Lady Pushkin's saying, hello, Robert. Sorry to sneak in a not related question, but why does Qyburn want Jon dead? Is it Jon specifically, or just that he's Lord Commander? Or do you think he knows something from the Citadel? Okay, so yes. Questions on Summerhall done for my patrons. If you've got any more, drop them into the chat. Now I will quickly go through there. Christine Denny saying, I need to go back to the beginning. Glad I've managed to catch even some of Robert's live. Christine, this is a hello directed to you. If you've gone back to the beginning and then worked your way all the way back through to here, welcome. But Lady Pushkin's a question not related to Summerhall, but why does Qyburn want Jon dead? This is a question related to near the end of is it Feast for Crows probably. We get Cersei, who is she's trying to rule, and the question is what do we do with Jon Snow, who's been elected leader of the Night's Watch, and basically Qyburn comes up with this plan that you could send a whole bunch of people up there and as members of the Night's Watch, and then they just kill him. I mean, it's slightly more nuanced than that, but that's basically the idea. And Cersei kind of likes this idea, but it's kind of got like events overtake them. Why is it? Is he in contact with the Citadel? No, Qyburn. I see no reason to believe that the things got with him and the Citadel are anything other than what we think. The Citadel chucked him out for doing research that they do not like. He is not secretly working for the Citadel. He is actually independent from the Citadel. So I don't think that's what's going on there. If you watch his arc, he is a social climber. And at any moment, he is trying to attach himself to the person with the most power who can give him the things that he wants because he just wants to do his research. This isn't me being an apologist for Qyburn because his research is pretty horrible. But what he wants is the things that he thinks he can get from people in positions of power, and he does get from Cersei. He gets the black cells. Do what you want. You can have a whole level of the black cells. Do what you want. He wants a fresh supply of bodies or people that she doesn't care what happens to. He wants these instruments. He wants research funding. You know, these are the things he wants. She lets him have it all. And in order for him to keep that position, he has to keep her sweet. And he knows, first of all, this idea that Ned Stark's son, for that is who she thinks Jon is at the wall as Lord Commander. She will not like that. And the idea, should we just get rid of him? That would really appeal to her. That will keep her on side. And the second thing is Stannis has gone up to the wall. And although communication is poor, it has to be said, Jon is clearly not opposing Stannis, and secondly, actually, if you look, he's helping Stannis quite a lot. He said, "You can stay here. You can stay at the wall. In fact, have the Night Fort, have the biggest and most impressive fort. Yes, it's run down, but if you can build that back up again, you can have that fort." Cersei would happily get rid of him. Qyburn knows that. He's not on his own mission with this. He's trying to keep in with Cersei. Class Ballerina. Jon is afraid of a double sacrifice of Mance and Monster, and eventually maybe Aemon. First the father, then the son, to wake a dragon. Aemon also says this, better men than Stannis have done worse than this. Could this be a hint that Aemon believes Aegon was attempting something like this with his line of succession at Summerhall? Interesting. I have not caught that line before, I have to admit. So thank you for pointing that one out. Better men than Stannis have done worse than this. I mean, yeah, I've read the line, but I've not thought of applying that one to Egg. Um, Possibly, and I think that the angle I would go off from this is that if Egg has been doing his due diligence and he's been finding out how is it that you perform Valyrian magic bring to hatch dragons, bring dragons back, he would have got the answer that immediately springs into our minds: fire and blood. All Valyrian magic is based on fire and blood. And so, however much he wanted to get around it, he could do the fire. The fire is the bit we all concentrate on. There's a massive fire there. Obviously, we're thinking about that. People will have told him, someone coming from a shy will have said, if you want to do this, you need some blood sacrifices. There's no mention of this. Did this happen? He would have been told. How would he have reacted to this? We like to think, because we know Egg as a child, we know him, we like to think, well, no, of course he wouldn't. Of course he wouldn't be sacrificing someone. Might he have we got told that he dreamt of dragons and the dragon dreams killed him? That's what Maester Aemon said. Might he have got himself into a position where he thinks this is more important, that he might have allowed or understood that that might be a thing, that you would have to sacrifice people? Might he have found some people who were already sentenced to death and then said, can we just kill you here rather than there? I don't know how he would do it, but anyway, sounds a bit gruesome. So I think it's a bit dark. And so when we get to, as you say, Aemon being aware of this idea of sacrifices, might he have thought that Aegon did it? I I wish I could give a strong no to this. I wish I could say no. Of course, Aegon wouldn't have done it, but we've not seen him as an adult. We've not seen what this obsession was like for him, and so he would definitely have been told. Whether or not he went through with it is a completely different matter. Uh, Maura Lee saying, if Bloodraven had the power to go back in time, would he have tried to prevent the tragedy at Harrenhal or allow it to happen? Well, so my working assumption is that he has been spending decades trying to get the Targaryen bloodline to be just how he wants it to be. And the tragedy of Summerhall was pretty much the last manipulation that made that happen. So my take is that he would be okay with that. And secondly, he doesn't actually need to go back in time because he was alive at that time. So he was, at that time, he will have been hooked up in the Weirwood Network, almost certainly north of the wall. And he can, I think that there's a fair chance that, fair to middling chance that he actually caused it in some way. And Morally, clarifying Summerhall, not Hammerhall. Summerhall, not Harrenhal. Yeah. Hallie Summers saying, can't a man commit crimes against nature and explore the profane science of necromancy in peace? Qyburn, probably. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the feeling that we're getting from him. Desert Stormborn Charlie 11 says, sounds like Egg tried to augment the ritual and get around the blood part, but it had to be discussed. Yeah, I mean that's my. I mean, if I had to try and work a way through this for Egg, it would be he would have been told. I don't think we can get around the fact that somebody will have said to him, if you want to do this, there needs to be a blood sacrifice. Maybe if you got 7 eggs, maybe you need 7 blood sacrifices. Who knows? And then that fits in well with the Septon, who's like, yeah, I don't think we can agree with this. So that kind of works, but then you could certainly imagine if Egg stays something approximating the innocent person that we know him as at the moment in the books. If he stays like that, then maybe he does say, no, I'm not doing that. There must be another way around this. And then people might draw the conclusion, reading the stories, that the reason it didn't work, the dragon's eggs didn't hatch, is because he actually didn't follow the formula. George R. R. Martin is not a fan of formulas when it comes to magic. Andrew Kay saying, for sure, Summerhall kept the bloodlines in place. The surviving generations were both lines of incest, so it really keeps the formula the same. Yeah, it really does. Andrew Kay saying, crazy amount of dreamers in that generation, potentially all of the siblings. If you're talking about Aegon the Fifth, then yeah, all 4 brothers dreamed of dragons. And that's what Maester Aemon said. He said, all of my brothers dreamed of dragons. He clearly dreamed of dragons. We know that Diron, the drunkard, dreamed of dragons. We've seen him doing it. We know of Viserion, second mind bank of the day. I must be getting tired. It's getting late. But yes, all 4 of them were for Dragon Dreamers. That's absolutely right. Did the Maester, Lady Pushkin say, did the Maester survive and deliver Rhaegar? Actually, here, hang on. I've not mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning. This fabulous thing behind me here, this is, and I'll move out of the way in just one second. This is from The World of Ice and Fire. This is by Mark Simonetti. I'm never 100% sure how to pronounce his name, but he's a fantastic author. I just want to make sure, I'm going to make sure he gets a credit down in the description as well. But yeah, I've been sort of in front of it all of this time, but for me, it's the definitive Summerhall picture, and I'm moving to one side because you can see Summerhall there, but also just hang on there. That is Rhaella giving birth, and now I don't think that the artist here. Some of the art we do have, particularly some of the ones of the Amok did of the Targaryen rulers, then they got us specific advice from George R. R. Martin on what they should look like. I don't think that the artist here got anything specific from George R. R. Martin about what this is. So we don't know that the Maester was there. But I think that in those circumstances, given we know that the Maester seems to have survived long enough at least to be able to write an account of it afterwards. And if you were the Maester in that situation, yeah, I'm sure you'd have been paying attention to what was going on and where all the action was, because you'll have had, at the very least, an academic interest in what was going on. But if the heir to the throne is about to have another heir, this gets very complicated with having grandchildren. I don't know exactly what you call them, but if somebody's going into labour, then yeah, that's where your priority would go. And so that makes sense for why the Maester would have survived. Desert Storm before Charlie 11 saying, what's odd though is in the House of the Dragon show, at least we hear of eggs hatching that presumably haven't had an associative sacrifice. Or is that something we just don't have details for or have to figure out? No, so this is a thing which, thank you for this, because I think this is a really important point to clarify. When in the first half of the Targaryen, before the Dance of the Dragons, dragons just hatched. That's what happened. And this is just it's not a thing you had to do a special thing for. This is just dragon eggs hatch like eggs for other animals. They just hatch. Normally, I mean, it's certainly being in Dragonstone in sort of like hot conditions and things like that seems to work better, but they did hatch in other places. One hatched in the Vale. One we've had them hatch in King's Landing. So they have hatched in various places. The difference is once after the Dance of the Dragons, then those dragon eggs, when the dragons were born, they came out stunted, misshapen, and then the dragon eggs stopped being hatching at all. And once that happened, then there were no more. So that's the point at which the Targaryens started panicking. So, well, how do we do that? How did they used to? That just happened. I don't. Then we have to do something. It has to be something different. What do we do? And that's why they're like searching for this ancient knowledge. This is why Egg was searching for this ancient knowledge. How can we help? There must be something that needs to happen. But it's almost as if a line is drawn. Something happens to those dragon eggs. Even if you don't believe the Maesters poisoned them all, I do. But if you don't believe, then you have to have a reason why at that point the dragon eggs just stopped working. And after they stopped working, you couldn't get them to hatch. They'd just been hanging around for too long. So it's an important point because it shows. I often talk about. Because it's not a word George R. R. Martin uses, but it's the ambient level of magic in the world. It seems that when dragons are there, magic things are easier than when they're not there. So I used the example earlier of when after Dany's dragons been hatched, then fire magicians and Karth could perform more things. The glass candles started working again. The ambient level of magic increased because dragons were there. When the dragons had gone, the ambient level of magic was not there. So something special had to happen in order to make the dragon eggs hatch. Okay, let's have a quick flick through. Andrew K saying bringing dragons back from extinction is a totally different proposition. Magical intervention is required. Yes, there's also if you kind of go back with the dragon has three heads. One of the bits of House of the Dragon that I give in terms of lore greatest weight to is, do you remember at the end of season 1, Daemon goes looking for Vermithor and sings a song in High Valyrian. Well done, Matt Smith, by the way. The idea of singing a song in a completely made up language and making it sound that natural. That was a good little bit of acting. But he sings this song, and we got the translation of the lyrics. And the way that went was Ty McKell, who was one of the writers there, she wrote the lyrics, and she, out of everyone on that writing staff, is closest to George R. Martin because she used to be his assistant. So because we know that bit specifically was her. Most of the other writing, yes, each episode will have a named person with them, but the rest of the writing team will have had their own little things in here. This, it would appear, was from her. So that bit, I think, is probably closest lore-wise, and that certainly seemed to imply that there was some kind of magical, in terms of dragon bonding, some kind of magical price had been paid in the past. And then we're just like piggybacking off of that again this time. Maura Lee, great to see you. I hope you have a great rest of the night as well. Okay, I think actually with that I will start to just do a couple of other quick notices of things coming up. As I say, I've got that. In fact, I've got a series, an Azor Ahai series of videos which I've done. It's just a short series of videos, but Azor Ahai explained what is the legend, the myth of Azor Ahai. How does this connect with the prince that was promised? All of that. One speculating who is Azor Ahai reborn in the story. We've got several candidates, and then a couple of kind of linked ones. One, how will Jon come back from the dead? Basically, how we saw what happened on the show. I think it will happen a bit differently in the books, and then what I mentioned earlier, Dany and the hatching of her eggs. I was also wondering if you'd be interested. I did a load of videos on the Lord of the Rings side of the house about the Lord of the Rings from Sauron's perspective, or the Lord of the Rings from Saruman's perspective. So what's the story look like to them? How would you think about something like A Song of Ice and Fire from Melisandre's perspective? What does it look like from how she's going through this? I thought that might be quite a fun video to do, but yeah, let me know what you think. So I've got that. I've got the usual Lord of the Rings videos coming out too, and yeah, a few other goodies, things happening. If you are a $10 plus patron, then don't forget to go over to Patreon and let me know what you think about future live streams here. I've gone all of this time without thanking my moderators. Sorry. I normally remember to do that halfway through, but I've been enjoying this topic and just kept on talking. Moderators, you do an amazing job. Thank you so much for keeping the chat going, keeping everybody feeling welcome. This is a safe place, and it's a safe place because the moderators are there. If you are in the chat, just give the moderators a little bit of love. Thank you very much. And also from me, a big thank you, not just to the moderators, but to my patrons. And if you're a channel member here as well, thank you very much. Okay, that is all I think for this time. If you're watching back a little bit later on YouTube, appearing somewhere around here is a link to other live streams. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. And thank you if you do. But that is all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you next week.